Warrior Lore. Chapter 3666. When Sun Kong heard this, he shook his head slightly and said with a bitter smile, "Brother Daoran, you really think too highly of me. My Dantian is destroyed, and my nascent soul, I'm afraid it will also be greatly damaged. Not to mention completely obliterated. Even if I lose an arm or a leg, to completely recover, not only will I need to take a nascent soul pill, but I also need to cultivate for hundreds of years to fully recover. That nascent soul pill is a legendary immortal pill. I've only heard of it and never seen it, but..." At this point, Sun Kong hesitated and said in a low voice, "I know a secret recipe to use the nascent soul of a cultivator who just became a nascent soul." Xiao Hua laughed and hurriedly waved his hand. He gave Zhang Daoran a look and then said to Sun Kong, "No need to trouble brother Sun Kong. I have a medicinal pill here. Although it's not as good as the nascent soul pill that fellow Taoist mentioned, it has an excellent effect on rebuilding the Dantian. I just haven't had a chance to take it. After a while, I'll find a place to take it. Although it can't be completely recovered in a short time, it's possible to use magic power and divine sense." "Ah, Brother Xiao, what medicinal pill is this?" Zhang Daoran was transmitting his voice to Sun Kong. Before Zhang Daoran could explain clearly, Sun Kong heard Xiao Hua showing off and hurriedly spoke. As soon as he opened his mouth, he was scolded by Zhang Daoran. Sun Kong's face also showed embarrassment. After all, both of them felt that Xiao Hua was making an excuse. Unexpectedly, Xiao Hua raised his hand and took out a jade bottle from his bosom. He said with a smile, "This pill is called the Heaven Mending Pill. Not only can it be used to repair the Dantian, but it can also repair meridians." "Damn, the name is really arrogant," Sun Kong said with a smile. "If it can repair nascent souls, that's even better." Xiao Hua shrugged his shoulders and took another Heaven Mend pill. He replied, "This medicinal pill has been used by Little Brother before on Gold Core and Foundation building disciples whose cultivations were crippled. I still don't know what kind of effect it has on nascent souls." "Really?" Not to mention Sun Kong, even Zhang Daoran asked with some surprise. Xiao Hua smiled and took out a few more jade bottles and handed them over. He said, "I'll give these two brothers some first. Thank you for your care on Yaodai Mountain." Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong laughed and caught it. They looked at each other, and there seemed to be something else in their eyes. Xiao Hua, if you've consumed the medicinal pill, you should first find an abode to rest in. Once your injuries are slightly better, I'll ask the two seniors to send you back to Black Cloud Ridge." Fairy Jing had been holding Xiao Hua back. Her previous anxiousness was a temporary measure, but now that there were two male cultivators, Fairy Jing could no longer act as a temporary measure. Now that Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong already knew that Xiao Hua's injuries were fake, they naturally wouldn't expose it. They hurriedly waved their hands and said, "We still have matters to attend to. I'm afraid we can't send Xiao Hua back to Black Cloud Ridge. Fairy Jing, if you don't have any special matters, why don't you send Xiao Hua back? You're a nascent soul cultivator, so you should be able to protect Xiao Hua." Fairy Jing didn't expect the two of them to push the blame away, so she hesitated. Zhang Daoran thought a lot. He smiled and said, "Now that we have come out of the Yaodai Assembly, we have escaped from the tiger's den, there is no need to be so anxious. As a matter of fact, the fellow Taoists who trained with us on the Yaodai Mountain have all gathered here. Let's first discuss how to distribute the things we obtained on the Yaodai Mountain. Brother Xiao also happens to be recuperating from his injuries. It won't be too late for Fairy Jing to make a decision when it's time to leave." "All right." Fairy Jing nodded slightly. She looked to the left and pointed to a mountain peak in the distance, saying, "How about over there? Junior will take Xiao Hua there first." Sun Kong looked up. Although there was a lot of snow on the mountain peak, there was a large flat open space suitable for cultivators to rest. He nodded and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Fairy Jing." Fairy Jing flew away with Xiao Hua. Sun Kong took out the jade bottle, looked at it for a moment, and whispered a few words to Zhang Daoran. Soon after, over 100 cultivators flew over from all directions. They were the Taoist cultivators who had gone through life and death with them at the Yaodai Assembly a year ago. Even if Kong Hongwu was still alive, He probably couldn't believe that the Yaotai assembly he had painstakingly created to provoke Taoist cultivators to kill each other and weaken the power of Taoist cultivators had now become an opportunity for Taoist cultivators to get closer and cultivate feelings. Although it hadn't happened before, from today onwards, more and more cultivators had tasted the sweetness and began to form groups at the Yaotai assembly. When these cultivators saw Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong, they were still as respectful as they were at the Yaotai assembly. After greeting them, they stood quietly on the left in an extremely orderly manner. However, while many cultivators were standing, they also looked into the distance as if they were checking Xiao Hua's movements. After less than an hour, Zhang Daoran looked around and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, thank you for trusting me and fellow Taoist Sun Kong, and handing over all our gains in the Yaotai meeting. We can't let you down. Now, please come with us to discuss. We'll find a time and place, and we'll distribute our gains to you." Okay. The cultivators all smiled and said, "Seniors, you can come up with a plan. We believe in you." "That's not right." Sun Kong looked at the nearly 300 cultivators and said in confusion, "How come this old man doesn't remember there being so many people?" "Haha." Zhang Daoran flew up and said with a laugh, "Those who can come are naturally Taoist cultivators. This old man won't mind. Brother Sun Kong, you don't have to worry about it." "Okay." Sun Kong glanced at the crowd and said indifferently, "If you're sincere, this old man won't say anything. If you're half-hearted, don't blame this old man for being ruthless." After saying that, Sun Kong followed Zhang Daoran and flew to the mountain peak. Everyone was magnanimous and didn't care about Sun Kong's words. They followed the two to the mountain peak. Naturally, Xiaohua wouldn't immediately meditate. Instead, he stood there with a smile on his face. All the cultivators flew in front of him, then landed and bowed. Every one of them had a respectful expression on their faces. Xiaohua was very humble. After returning everyone's greetings, he said with a smile, "This Xiao has never been good at socializing. Previously, after leaving Yaodai Mountain, I wanted to leave first. However, Brother Daoran and Brother Sun Kong stopped this Xiao, saying that the idea of the trade fair was this Xiao's idea and that this Xiao must appear. This Xiao thought for a moment and didn't dare to agree. After all, this Xiao has his own matters to attend to. Moreover, these two brothers' characters and moral integrity are trustworthy. They definitely won't disappoint you. If this Xiao didn't go, it would be unnecessary." Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong glanced at each other and smiled bitterly. The two of them naturally wanted to invite Xiaohua to participate in the trade fair. However, they didn't expect that Xiaohua would refuse before they even opened their mouths. Apart from what Xiaohua said earlier, there must be some other misgivings. "Brother Xiao, you're wrong," Sun Kong hurriedly said. "Since this idea was yours, you have to take responsibility until the end. Even if you don't participate, you have to at least know how the trade is done, the time and place of the trade, and even the results of the trade, right?" "That's right. We hope that Taoist Master Xiao can also participate if you have the time." The cultivators looked at Xiaohua fervently. Xiaohua thought for a moment and nodded. "This Xiao has some injuries and needs to heal first. How about you two discuss it with your fellow Taoists first and inform this Xiao when there's a result?" "Good." Exalted Master Sun Kong signaled Zhang Daoran with his eyes again, and he led the group of cultivators to discuss the matters of the trade. Zhang Daoran brought Xiaohua and Fairy Jing to a secluded place. Zhang Daoran didn't avoid Fairy Jing and said with a smile, "Brother Xiao, do you know how to refine pills?" "I do." Xiaohua nodded. Zhang Daoran's face revealed a happy expression and probed, "Was the heaven-mending pill refined by Brother Xiao?" "Yes." Xiaohua said concisely, putting Zhang Daoran's heart at ease. "Good, good, good." Zhang Daoran said 3 times in a row and rubbed his hands. "There are many fellow Taoists in the hidden immortal continent who can refine pills. Even this old man can only refine ordinary pills. As far as this old man knows, there isn't a single cultivator who can refine an immortal pill like the heaven-mending pill." Xiaohua smiled. He naturally understood what Zhang Daoran said. The cultivators of the hidden immortal continent had to rely on themselves to cultivate, whether it was refining pills or refining tools. However, because of limited energy, limited spiritual herbs, and limited materials, Those who could truly become masters were naturally very few. Moreover, once they cultivated to foundation establishment, they had to prepare spiritual herbs for the dry separation pill and familiarize themselves with the refining method. Once they cultivated to Jean Dan, they had to worry about the nascent pregnancy pill. How could they be distracted by other pills? Even if there were some rogue cultivators who didn't establish a country and wanted to make a living by refining pills and refining tools, it would be impossible for them to cultivate to the point of perfection by themselves, right? Brother Daoran, if you have any errands, just say the word, Xiaohua said with a smile. Zhang Daoran waved his hand. Let's talk about it in detail later. It's not appropriate to say it now. Good. If Brother Daoran has something to do, this Xiao will definitely do his best. Xiaohua agreed. Moreover, after thinking for a moment, he waved his hand and took out a small chinkuan pouch. He handed it to Zhang Daoran and said, "The pills inside are for Brother Daoran and Brother Sun Kong. You can distribute them as you see fit." Zhang Daoran took the small chinkuan pouch and scanned it with his divine sense. He opened his mouth slightly and his face was full of surprise. Xiaohua was already used to Zhang Daoran's surprise. Without waiting for Zhang Daoran to speak, he handed over a rejuvenation pill and a heaven-mending pill to Fairy Jing. He said, "Fairy Jing, this Xiao has a few pills for female cultivators. They aren't considered precious. Please kindly accept them." Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. Generally speaking, women didn't care whether the things given by others were precious or not. What they cared about was whether others gave them things. Xiaohua didn't say what kind of pills he gave Fairy Jing. Fairy Jing's heart was immediately filled with sweetness. Fairy Jing reached out to take them and carefully put them away in the chinkuan pouch. She lowered her head and said, "Many thanks, fellow Taoist Xiao. No need to thank me, no need to thank me." Xiaohua blinked his eyes. "Just take it as my thanks for escorting Fairy Jing." -13. Chapter 3667. Hee, if you want me to be your bodyguard, I'm afraid these pills won't be enough. Fairy Jing replied with a chuckle. Since Xiaohua wanted to cast a long line to catch a big fish, he naturally had to act well. Fairy Jing was a necessary person. Seeing Fairy Jing agree, Xiaohua laughed and clapped his hands. "Fairy Jing, you can name your price. If I have anything, I'll give it to you." Fairy Jing was overjoyed and acted like a spoiled child. Her eyes rippled with a smile. "I've been thinking day and night about entering the leaving body realm. I wonder if fellow Taoist Xiao can help me?" "No problem." Xiaohua agreed without hesitation. Seeing Xiaohua's seriousness, Fairy Jing hurriedly waved her hand. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I'm just joking with you. No need to take it seriously. I'll be happy if fellow Taoist can give me some pointers on cultivation." "I'm not joking," Xiaohua said seriously. Then, he even looked at Zhang Daoran, who was smiling beside him. "Brother Daoran, we all have to face the out-of-body stage. Isn't it better to comprehend it together than to work behind closed doors?" "Well said, Brother Xiao." Zhang Daoran hurriedly gave a thumbs up and praised. "When Brother said you weren't going to participate in the trade fair, I was worried that Brother had some misgivings and that we had some bad intentions. Now, it seems that's not the case. Since that's the case, Brother Xiao, this old man will discuss something with you." Then, Zhang Daoran transmitted a few words to Xiaohua. The general idea was that he wanted to unite his forces with Sun Kong's and Xiaohua's forces to develop together. Moreover, there was a faint hint of entrusting. Xiaohua pondered for a moment and nodded. "This matter is of great importance. I'm afraid it's not something that can be explained in a few words. After the trade fair, I'll have someone discuss it with Brother Darren's subordinates. The three of us will have a good idea." "Good, it's a deal." Zhang Darren's heart was set. He smiled at Fairy Jing. "I'll have to trouble Fairy Jing to protect Taoist Xiao. I'll go over there and take a look. Senior Daoran, please." Fairy Jing respectfully bowed and sent Zhang Daoran away. Seeing Zhang Daoran leave, Xiaohua sat cross-legged on the snow with his 5 hearts facing the sky. His mind entered his body to investigate. When Fairy Jing saw Xiaohua circulating his energy, she didn't dare to come over and disturb him. She only slightly released her divine sense to guard the surroundings. Kong Hongwu is truly insidious and cunning. The green-robed Xiaohua was now in control of his nascent soul. He spat out golden light from his mouth, spreading the medicinal power of the heavenly mending pill and repairing his damaged Dantian bit by bit. When he saw the Jade Archive Xiaohua enter, he gnashed his teeth and said, "Your methods are also vicious. Our corporeal bodies have been tempered, and our meridians are incomparable to those of ordinary cultivators. That so-called nascent soul annihilation art can penetrate the corporeal body and directly attack the Dantian and even destroy the nascent soul. If I hadn't gone out with my nascent soul, I'm afraid I would have been killed by him. Once bitten, twice shy." Jade Archive Xiaohua sighed slightly. "This time, we suffered a great loss, but the harvest is not small. In the end, nearly 100 nascent souls of the demon purification pot were taken away by the fiend's saber. I'm afraid he won't be able to take away many of them." Upon hearing the harvest, the green-robed Xiaohua was immensely proud of himself. He smiled and said, "Right now, you and I have a lot of empty nascent souls. I want to wear one. Look at one and throw another one to the side." "Empty nascent souls?" Jade Archive Xiaohua frowned. "Aren't the nascent souls that we seized from the whirlpool in the demon refining gourd all intact?" The green-robed Xiaohua shook his head and said, "The nascent souls are all intact, but a lot of them have already been destroyed. The huge whirlpool outside the demon refining gourd is used to destroy the nascent souls and nascent souls. The longer they stay inside, the thinner their nascent souls will be. If I didn't have the Kunlun mirror and the spiritual fire, I would have already been powerless to protect myself. How could I save Daoist Jingting?" "Oh, this is troublesome." Jade Archive Xiaohua frowned. "I still wanted to save these nascent soul cultivators and let them cultivate scattered nascent souls. The Immortal Palace is also strange. Why do they have so many nascent souls?" The green-robed Xiaohua was quite puzzled. Jade Archive Xiaohua shrugged. "I'm afraid you'll have to ask that immortal envoy in Kong Hongwu. Unfortunately, Kong Hongwu was killed by the demonic saber, and even his nascent soul didn't escape. There's simply no way to interrogate him." "Right. Do Shanjun's spiritual sense control in Cloud Pupil has a secret technique to control nascent souls using spiritual sense," the green-robed Xiaohua suggested again. "Although this secret technique is really sinister, it's suitable for these nascent souls whose nascent souls have yet to reach perfection. It's better than letting their nascent souls dissipate in a muddle, right? Moreover, fellow Taoist is proficient in nascent soul branding and nascent soul splitting techniques. In addition, your spiritual sense has been tempered to such a terrifying level in the Rockfall Matrix. This nascent soul is simply tailor-made for fellow Taoist." "That's not all." A voice faintly resounded in the void like heavenly thunder. Jade Archive Xiaohua raised his head in surprise. "Eh? Soul Cultivator fellow Taoist has also made progress?" "That's right, fellow Taoist. Please come in for a chat," Soul Cultivator Xiaohua said with a smile. Jade Archive Xiaohua's figure flashed and disappeared into the mysterious dark clouds. After a moment, he returned to his Dantian with a smile. Soul Cultivator Xiaohua had already comprehended several soul cultivation techniques. Among them, there was a technique to repair the nascent soul, or rather, a beginner technique to repair the soul. Isn't this what Xiaohua needs the most right now? Great. Green-robed Xiaohua urged his invisible nascent soul to clap his hands and laugh. "It's really like someone giving you a pillow when you're sleepy. Now that everything is ready, I don't even need the east wind anymore." "Indeed." Xiaohua nodded. "However, I seized 12 nascent souls from the swirl in the demon purification pot, and 11 were seized by fellow Taoist in green robe, including the 117 nascent souls that fellow Taoist in green robe sent into the lost realm of Kunlun when he was refining the Kunlun mirror in the swirl. We have over 140 nascent souls that are still missing. It will take a lot of time and energy to repair the nascent souls of these nascent souls without using the secret technique of telepathic thoughts. Don't be a hypocrite." The green-robed Xiaohua sneered. "Who knows what kind of character these nascent soul cultivators have? If you don't use your secret technique, how are you going to control them? Don't be a snake-warming farmer." I will naturally consider this." Xiaohua smiled. "You don't have to worry, fellow Taoist green robe. That's good." The green-robed Xiaohua didn't speak anymore. In fact, after this Yaodai meeting, it's obvious where our shortcomings are. Jade Archive Xiaohua said, I need a more powerful spiritual weapon, or even a spiritual treasure. And the green-robed Xiaohua curled his lips. He knew that his problem had come, so he only responded lazily. The soul-punishing vital light needs to be refined again. The previous two nascent soul sword spirits were already difficult to kill a 5th-stage essence chi cultivator. Moreover, the previous soul-punishing vital light mainly had an Yin-type sword spirit, which was too soft. Many cultivators' defensive magic treasures couldn't be pierced through. This time, I obtained Taoist what is fire gourd. I can refine it into the soul-punishing vital light. There's also that spatial monster's thigh. The green-robed Xiaohua saw that he couldn't refuse, so he blinked his eyes and said, the tip of that thigh can pierce through the void. It's very sharp. There's no harm in refining it into the soul-punishing vital light. You only need to use the tip. Xiaohua knew that the green-robed Xiaohua's words were very reasonable. He thought for a moment and said, I feel that there are other uses for other places. Good. The green-robed Xiaohua clapped his hands. Just this little bit is enough. There's also the soaring dragon shears. Xiaohua said again. Previously, I felt that this thing was only half a piece, so I didn't want to refine it. I wanted to wait until I gathered all the pieces. Unfortunately, even the last piece of the Kunlun mirror has been found, but this thing has no clues at all. Taoist green-robed, please refine it while you're at it. While I'm at it. The green-robed Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Does Taoist know how difficult it was for I to refine the Kunlun mirror? To tell the truth, if it wasn't a matter of life and death, I wouldn't have been able to refine it easily. Xiaohua of course instantly said, that's why Taoist is several times more powerful than I. I can only trouble Taoist for this matter. I heard Confucian Taoist drop a book bag, saying something about a hands-off shopkeeper. Taoist, isn't he talking about you? The green-robed Xiaohua said somewhat eccentrically. Haha. Confucian Taoist Xiaohua's voice uncontrollably sounded above his head. He then hurriedly explained, Taoist. This isn't what I said. It's what the green-robed Xiaohua said himself. No matter. Fellow Taoists are all improving. I'm also very happy, Xiaohua said with a smile. He then handed over the sword gourd, fire gourd, and soaring dragon shears to the green-robed Xiaohua, waiting for him to refine it after he repaired his dantian. Give it to me. The green-robed Xiaohua stretched out his hand. Without Taoist's blood essence, I can't refine it. Sigh. Xiaohua sighed and waved his hand. Taoist should first repair your dantian and slowly nourish the two magic treasures. It's really not easy for I to take out my blood essence now. Let's wait a bit. That bastard Mo Ling has seriously injured us. The green-robed Xiaohua was silent. After a while, he advised in a low voice, Taoist, Mo Ling is an outsider after all. You can't trust him. That demonic technique is also a technique of the demonic realm. You and I are humans. It's fine if we don't cultivate it. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Maybe before, but now I have been forced to do something beyond my ability. If I don't cultivate the demonic technique, I can't control the demonic saber. If I don't control the demonic saber, I'll always be in danger of being controlled by the demonic saber. Taoist, what do you think we should do? This demonic saber is also strange. That demonic dragon has clearly been swallowed into a demonic spirit. How can it still be so arrogant? Confucian Taoist Xiaohua gritted his teeth. Even I can't completely restrain it. Since it's a maggot in the bone, we can only slowly think of a way. Xiaohua said. Although this demonic saber is really powerful and can kill a 5th-grade elemental energy great-grandmaster like it's a toy, the backlash is too strong. Actually, fellow Taoists, don't you all feel that everyone is a bit affected? Saint Sung once said, I reflect on myself 3 times a day. Am I not loyal to others? Make friends but don't trust them? Pass it down and don't learn it? Xiaohua's face turned cold. -13. Chapter 3668. Sigh. Fellow immortal is right. The Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua let out a long sigh. My Confucian cultivator's righteous qi is innately capable of suppressing devilish qi, but if it is corroded by a devilish spirit, the degree of damage is also several times greater than that of fellow immortals. This matter, I was wrong. Hee, it's best to correct your mistakes. The green-robed Xiao Hua spoke first. Fellow Taoist, you've already given Green-Robe the magic tool of the Taoist sect. Shouldn't you also give my Confucian cultivator's imperial magic tool to me? The regretful Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua asked for the imperial magic tool, as if he wanted to make up for his mistake. Jade Archive Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's right. The imperial star spike and the imperial shield should be given to fellow Taoist. There are also some things for Confucian cultivators. These aren't urgent. After fellow Taoist Green Robe organizes them, I'll give them to fellow Taoists to comprehend." Actually, Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua hesitated for a bit before saying, "I feel that the Confucian cultivator's Tao is a single breath. All the divine abilities are the same as the Buddhist sect's divine abilities. There is still a gap when compared to the Tao sects. I will refine these imperial equipment and will also help Immortal Friend fight your enemies. But Immortal Friend shouldn't expect too much." I naturally know this. Jade Archive Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "All right, let's not talk about this anymore. After this calamity, we all have to learn from our mistakes. The path of cultivation is really too long. I hope that everyone can reach the peak." Haha, I've reached the peak. Doesn't that mean you've also reached the peak? The green-robed Xiao Hua smiled and then said to the scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua, "Scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua, you shouldn't covet Kong Hongwu's Chinkuan bag. Although I have been recuperating and haven't carefully examined it, I can roughly see that in addition to the star card and other things Kong Hongwu cultivated, most of it is my Tao sect's magic treasures and cultivation methods. It was most likely the body he had collected in the hidden immortal continent. On the other hand, the cosmos pouches of the other 3 star lords have quite a few good items." Speaking up to here, the green-robed Xiao Hua looked at the Jade Archive. Xiao Hua said, "That's right. Fellow Taoist Jade Archive, within Kong Hongwu's Chinkuan pouch, there are indeed a few good items for my Tao sect. There are even many secret techniques. There is a jade box with a lot of runes on it. Those runes are the talismans of the Tao sect, and there is definitely something strange inside. Fellow Taoist, why don't you go take a look?" "All right, I understand." When Jade Archive Xiao Hua heard that Kong Hongwu's Chinkuan bag didn't have many things from Star-Lord Palace, he lost interest and nodded slightly. "I will go take a look now." Farewell, fellow Taoist." The green-robed Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said with a smile. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and with a flicker of his figure, he appeared in the space. After looking at Kong Hongwu's Cosmos sack, he reached into it and took out a jade box. Sure enough, just as the green-robed Xiao Hua had said, this jade box was overflowing with extraordinary splendor, and there were countless strange runes on it. These runes were very simple, and Xiao Hua couldn't recognize the Jade Archive. However, this did not hinder Xiao Hua. He casually opened the jade box and countless runes flew out from the jade box, turning into specks of light that floated in the air. As the runes dissipated, boom! With a low rumble, several auras of awe-inspiring auras rushed out of the jade box. "This is..." Jade Archive Xiao Hua frowned slightly, looking at the 5 strange imperial equipment that rushed out of the jade box. His heart was indescribably strange. Kong Hongwu is the Palace Lord of Star-Lord Palace, and he himself is a Confucian cultivator. Why did he seal these 5 imperial equipment with Tao talismans? While thinking, Jade Archive Xiao Hua waved his hand, and one of the imperial equipment that was faintly connected flew out and landed in his hand. This was a fist-sized ochre imperial equipment, and when it landed in his hand, it gave off a warm feeling. Moreover, this imperial equipment's texture was very solid, and it was engraved with mountains and rivers, flowers, birds, fish, insects, and other things, giving off an indescribable feeling of heaviness. Looking at the Jade Archive, Xiao Hua didn't know what to do, so he took out another one. After a while, Jade Archive Xiao Hua looked at the 5 imperial equipment. These 5 imperial equipment were obviously a set. It was just that the shapes were different, and the shapes were also strange. Some were like worms, some were like eagles, and some were like bears, and so on. These 5 imperial equipment. I'm afraid they're not simple. Jade Archive Xiaohua sneered. The Star Lords of Star-Lord Palace are all criminals of the Immortal Palace, and Kong Hongwu himself probably isn't that strong. He racked his brains to collect these imperial equipment to curry favor with the people of the Immortal Palace, and perhaps it's that so-called immortal emissary. Hee. No matter who he wants to show filial piety to, these things have fallen into Ai's hands, and I'm afraid they'll never see the light of day again. Immediately, Jade Archive Xiaohua threw these imperial equipment back into the jade box, casually throwing them into the pile of imperial equipment and magic treasures, and then his figure swayed, entering the inside of the space. After a long time, Xiaohua opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was Fairy Jing's concerned gaze. Although Fairy Jing wasn't close to Xiaohua, her eyes were overflowing with emotions as she watched Xiaohua's movements without blinking, fearing that Xiaohua would have any abnormalities. When Xiaohua suddenly opened his eyes, Fairy Jing was rather surprised. She didn't have time to move her eyes away, and their eyes met. Seeing the concern in Fairy Jing's eyes, Xiaohua sighed in his heart, and he had an impulse to tell her the reason for this matter, or simply let her go back, and he would leave alone to see what Taoist Yuanqing was plotting. But after thinking about it for a moment, he realized that aside from Fairy Jing, he really couldn't find a suitable cultivator to follow him. If he left, there would be a huge flaw. So, Xiaohua stood up and smiled at Fairy Jing, who was hastily avoiding his gaze, and said, Fairy Jing, I have something to tell you. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please speak. Fairy Jing was clearly somewhat absent-minded. If one day you discover that this Xiao is deceiving you about something, please don't blame this Xiao. This Xiao has his own difficulties. In fact, these words were quite obvious. If it was under normal circumstances, with Fairy Jing's pure heart, she would definitely be able to hear it. Unfortunately, this woman was currently a part of the situation, so how could she distinguish it? She hesitated for a moment, and then a trace of sadness appeared between her brows, as if she was thinking of something else. Xiaohua's heart thumped. Just as he was about to explain, he heard Zhang Daren's loud laughter again. Brother Xiao, I didn't disturb you, did I? If you've already rested, please come over like this. We've already arranged everything. Fairy Jing, don't think too much. Xiaohua could only comfort her like this, and urged his figure to fly over. Of course, flying techniques were the most ordinary, and his speed was also extremely slow. Oh? Fellow Taoist Xiao has already recovered? Master Sun Kong blinked his eyes at Xiaohua and said loudly. Xiaohua smiled slightly. He naturally knew that Master Sun Kong, in order to cater to his plan, had promoted him quite a bit. Presumably, his heroic deeds in the Rockfall Matrix had also been exaggerated by him. Sure enough, when Master Sun Kong accompanied Xiaohua in front of everyone, all the cultivators respectfully bowed and said in unison, Greetings, Taoist Xiao. Fellow Taoists. Xiaohua hurriedly returned the greeting, and with a wave of his hand, everyone felt a flash of Xiaohua's profound magic power, and the respect in their eyes became even more intense. Brother Xiao, this is the constitution that we've discussed. If you have time, take a look. Zhang Daoran took out a jade eye from his bosom and handed it over to Xiaohua. The time is set to be 3 years later. Moreover, all the things that we've obtained in the Jade Pavilion conference this time, except for the 2 treasures, will be recorded in it to show fairness. Good. Xiaohua nodded. We Dao sect cultivators don't have a good reputation in the hidden immortal continent. First, it's because Confucian cultivators exaggerate, and second, it's because our Dao sect's cultivation method is different from Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sections. We have a great need for spirit pills, spirit herbs, and cultivation methods. Sometimes, we have no choice but to do some things that corrupt our conscience. These things are admittedly done secretly, but there will always be a time when it's exposed. There's an old saying, the heavens are watching what people do. This Xiao doesn't dare to ask you fellow Taoists for anything. I only ask you fellow Taoists to think about your own conscience when you do things, and think about the heavens above your head. Brother Daoran and Brother Sun Kong have done extremely well. The word fairness is easy to say, but it's difficult to do. The two fellow Taoists actually put this word in front of your head. Presumably, all of you fellow Taoists are convinced in your heart. Leaving the treasures you've obtained with other fellow Taoists is also a relief. If this Xiao has the opportunity 3 years later, I'll definitely go and participate in the conference at that time. Once Xiao Hua's words came out, the several hundred cultivators had different expressions on their faces. Some looked pensive, some looked disapproving, and even some looked disdainful. Xiao Hua naturally didn't feel that his words could change everything. He already felt pretty good that he was able to seize this opportunity to speak his mind. Immediately after, Xiao Hua waved his hand again, and several hundred jade eyes fell down like rain. 1 or 2 fell in front of each cultivator's eyes. Oh? The crowd of cultivators looked at the jade eyes with puzzlement. They didn't know whether they should take it or not. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, this Xiao has a matter to ask of you. Inside these jade eyes are low-level mental cultivation methods from foundation establishment to enlightened realm. There are also some mental cultivation methods that are different from the current cultivation methods. This Xiao hopes that you fellow Taoists can take these jade eyes back, or pass them on to your own disciples, or gift them to the later generations of Taoist disciples. Of course, if you fellow Taoists can copy them and gift them to Confucian disciples with potential, this Xiao will be even more grateful." "Ha ha ha, that's easy." When Master Sun Kong heard this, he flicked his big sleeve and took the jade eyes in front of him. He said with a smile, "This old man will let the disciples make 10,000 copies and pass them on to other low-level disciples. Hee, I also have no problem." When the crowd of cultivators heard this, they naturally agreed without hesitation. It was just helping Xiao Hua distribute the cultivation methods. It was simply a matter of lifting their hands. "Many thanks, fellow Taoists." Xiao Hua was overjoyed. He raised his hand and saluted everyone. Then, the crowd of cultivators chatted with Xiao Hua for a while, trying to get familiar with him, and flew away respectively. Seeing that everyone had left, and Master Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran were also about to say goodbye, Xiao Hua thought of something and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists are the senior experts of my Taoist cultivators in the hidden immortal continent. My Taoist lineage's inheritance will also have to rely on fellow Taoists." -13. Chapter 3669. Then, Xiao Hua told them about his suspicions that Confucian cultivators had tampered with the Taoist techniques. Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong had cultivated for thousands of years and had encountered far more things than Xiao Hua, so how could they not feel anything? However, they had always been minding their own business. They were already very happy that they had obtained the correct techniques, so how could they care about others? Now that Xiao Hua mentioned it, he even took out a lot of cultivation methods to ask them to teach their disciples. Of course, they all agreed. Finally, before the two left, Xiao Hua specially asked them to help him find children with good aptitudes, and there was no limit to the number, the more the better. Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran knew that Xiao Hua wanted to teach disciples, so they wanted to remind him, but when they thought about how high Xiao Hua's cultivation was, how could he not know the pros and cons? They didn't mention it, and cupped their hands to bid farewell to Xiao Hua. Fairy Jing naturally stayed by Xiao Hua's side. She looked at Xiao Hua's actions with a dumbfounded expression. These were things she had never thought about before. In her heart, as long as she could cultivate to nascent soul, then late nascent soul, it would be her life's greatest goal. She didn't dare to hope for out-of-body cultivators, so her agreement with Xiao Hua was just a joke. After everyone had left, Fairy Jing said in a low voice, "Xiao Hua, what are you doing all this for? Are you trying to revitalize the Taoist sect? Are you trying to develop your own power? Is it because your power isn't enough, so you don't want to become sworn brothers with Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran?" Speaking of sworn brothers, Fairy Jing couldn't help but think of Xiao Hua's famous words, and her face flushed. If you're talking about revitalizing the Taoist sect, this Xiao's power isn't enough. Xiao Hua said with a smile, "Then just think of it as developing my own power. Although this Xiao's cultivation is good, I don't have many disciples under me, and many of them are good and bad." "So it's like that." Fairy Jing nodded, but she understood that just developing her own power didn't need to be so troublesome. "This is a great man." Fairy Jing couldn't help but praise in her heart. Xiaohua didn't know that he was so great in Fairy Jing's heart. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go. This Xiao still has some things to do. You have to escort this Xiao." Of course. Fairy Jing smiled and was abnormally quiet. "Oh, actually." Xiaohua thought for a moment and finally said, "I didn't suffer such heavy injuries." "Nonsense." Fairy Jing said angrily, "I'm the only one who knows about your injuries. Your nascent soul is damaged, and your dantian is damaged. Why don't you release your nascent soul for me to see?" Xiaohua sweated. Even if his nascent soul was in perfect condition, it still couldn't be seen by others. He raised his hand, wanting to cast a spell, but right now, he didn't have any magic power in his body, so he could only cast Confucian cultivation techniques. Forget it. This Xiao's nascent soul isn't wearing any treasured armor. Xiaohua shrugged helplessly. Cheeky. The corner of Fairy Jing's mouth curled up as she spat again. Her expression was one of joy. After flying with Xiaohua for a while, Fairy Jing was somewhat bewildered and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, you want to go to the front of Yaodai Mountain?" "Yeah," Xiaohua said with a smile. "This Xiao still has 2 new disciples there, and this Xiao still has some trivial matters to attend to." Fairy Jing advised, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this time's Yaodai Mountain gathering was really strange. I feel that, besides the strange treasure that Kong Hongwu mentioned, there must be something else that we don't know about. In particular, in the end, the Dragon Gate of the Yaodai Mountain gathering didn't appear, and that so-called Rainbow Bridge was even more strange. It's better for us to leave Yaodai Mountain as soon as possible." Xiaohua was well aware of this, but as a Taoist cultivator who killed Kong Hongwu, he should stay here at this time. Even if someone from the Immortal Palace came to investigate, he would appear calm and not easily be suspected by the Immortal Palace. Of course, this kind of calmness couldn't be too excessive. If people felt that he had nothing to fear, he would be suspected of trying to hide something. Therefore, Xiaohua nodded. "Fairy Jing is right. Let's hurry to the front of the mountain and leave as soon as we finish our business." When Fairy Jing heard Xiaohua say hurry, she immediately stretched out her hand and held Xiaohua's arm. She urged her magic power, and her figure turned into a rainbow and flew into the distance. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and could only let it be. He didn't know where the scorching sun formation was set up on Yaodai Mountain, but it took Fairy Jing more than an hour to bring Xiaohua to Yaodai Mountain. Perhaps it was because some cultivators had already come here, or perhaps it had already been a year since the Yaodai Mountain gathering began, but the previously lively Yaodai Mountain had become a lot more desolate. Not to mention the tents stationed in front of the mountain. Even the Taoist cultivators flying in the air had almost disappeared. Xiaohua didn't wait for them to arrive and had already released his divine sense. After Changyu and Wu Tian sensed it, they immediately flew out from their secluded cultivation and stood respectfully in the air. When Xiaohua and Fairy Jing arrived, the two looked at Fairy Jing very curiously and bowed. "Greetings, Taoist Xiao." "Greetings, Senior." Xiaohua smiled and said to the two, "This is Fairy Jing. She saved this old man at the Yaodai Mountain gathering." Then he told them about Changyu and Wu Tian's origins. The two didn't dare to be negligent and said respectfully again, "Many thanks, Fairy Jing." Fairy Jing waved her hand and took out 2 magic treasures from her bosom, handing them over to the two, saying, "This is the first time we've met. I don't know what hobbies you have, but I obtained these 2 magic treasures in my early years. Take them." Changyu and Wu Tian didn't dare to take them and looked at Xiaohua. "Haha, take them," Xiaohua said with a smile. "In the future, Fairy Jing won't be an outsider. You can treat her as your senior." "Yes, we understand." Changyu and Wu Tian smiled. Seeming to understand something, they reached out to take the magic treasures. Xiaohua's words were clearly ambiguous. Even if Fairy Jing heard it, her face turned slightly red. But let alone Fairy Jing, even Xiaohua himself understood that at this moment, as long as one listened attentively, they would definitely have different meanings unless he didn't say anything. Since Xiaohua said he could treat Fairy Jing as his senior, Changyu didn't hold back and said in a low voice, "Master, did you succeed?" Disciple heard that this time's Jade Pavilion gathering was a great calamity. Out of 10 nascent soul seniors, less than 10% of Jindan cultivators survived. "Master?" Fairy Jing's beautiful eyes flashed with a strange splendor. She increasingly felt that there were too many things she couldn't see through on Xiaohua. Hee, when Master takes action, how could I leave anything empty? Xiaohua chuckled, looking very wretched, as if he was going to steal chickens and touch dogs. Congratulations, Master. You can be the master of a country. Chang Yu and Wu Tian were overjoyed and bowed to salute. Congratulations. Congratulations. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, How has your cultivation been recently? Have you thought it through? Wu Tian rushed to say, Disciple came to Jade Mountain to die. Disciple cleaned up the cave. As long as Master comes out, Disciple will follow Master to Black Wind Ridge. Chang Yu also smiled and said, Master's cultivation method, Disciple's cultivation is very smooth. Moreover, Disciple also saw Junior Brother's progress. There's no deviation. Although Disciple didn't expect to go to Black Wind Ridge, it doesn't matter if Disciple goes back a few years later. Disciple will follow Master to Black Wind Ridge. Good. Since that's the case, you all go to Black Wind Ridge first, Xiaohua said and waved his hand, taking out the jade box containing the lot of the state preceptor from the space. What? Master? Isn't going back to Black Wind Ridge? Chang Yu and Wu Tian were stunned. Even Fairy Jing was shocked. Fellow Taoist Xiao, you aren't going back to Black Wind Ridge? Where are you going? With your current situation, it's better to cultivate as soon as possible. This Xiaohua was about to explain. Woo! A ray of light appeared in the distance, turning into a ray of light that fell in front of Xiaohua. Xiaohua grabbed it with his hand. It was the message talisman he refined. Oh? Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, We'll talk about this later. This Xiao's good news is coming. Sure enough, after a short while, that 1,000-demon sacred realms Ingpu brought 2 demons over. The 3 of them were wearing strange armors that covered their faces and bodies, but the grayish-white demon clouds under their feet still exposed their identities. Seeing the 3 demons flying over, the doubt on Fairy Jing's face became even stronger. Xiaohua urged his body to fly forward for a while, and he cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist Ingpu is indeed a trustworthy person. Cough, cough. No, a demon with trustworthiness. This shout just came out of the Jade Pavilion conference, and I have good news. Ingpa smiled and cupped his hands. This one congratulates Taoist Xiao. This year, those who can come down from Jade Mountain are all elites of the hidden immortal continent's Taoist sections. Although this one heard a lot of alarmist news, this one firmly believes that Taoist Xiao can return safely. You're welcome, you're welcome, Xiaohua said with a smile. This one was just lucky to escape death. Fellow Taoist must have noticed that this one is already injured. Therefore, this one is far from being the elite that fellow Taoist thinks. Ingpo waved his hand. This one doesn't care if you are an elite of the Taoist sects or not. What this one cares about is Taoist Zhao's trustworthiness. Then, he took out 2 Chinquan bags from his waist. The 2 demons behind him also hurriedly took out 4 Chinquan bags and handed them to Xiaohua together. Ingpa didn't do anything special. The 2 demons behind him slightly flew forward a few steps and sandwiched Xiaohua in the middle, as if they were afraid that Xiaohua would escape. Seeing this, Ingpa said with a bitter smile, Taoist Xiao, please don't blame them. This one's clansmen have suffered too many losses in front of the human race. There are too many tricks that they can't think of. Even if this one took out Taoist Zhao's vitality stones, the clansmen wouldn't dare to believe it too much. This old man can understand. Xiaohua nodded and didn't think it was strange. He waved his hand and took out several small Chinquan bags and handed them to Ingpu and the 2 demons, saying, You guys take the vitality stones first. This one will look at the things inside. Ingpa didn't take the small Chinquan bags, but said a few strange words indifferently. The 2 demons hurriedly took the small Chinquan bags and looked at each other, then flew back behind Ingpu. Okay, this time, thank you fellow Taoist. Xiaohua took out a Jedi bag and handed it to Ingpu, saying, Next time, if fellow Taoist has something, you can send it to the place recorded on the Jedi bag. This one's imprint is inside. It's also recorded who you give it to. They will pay fellow Taoist enough vitality stones. -13. Chapter 3670. Seeing Xiao Hua like this, Yingpu was stunned and said in a low voice, Taoist master, You don't want to take a look at the things inside? No need. Xiao Hua said with a smile. To be honest, the things I need are all rare and strange. Taoist friend might not have the things inside. However, if I only want my own things, then wouldn't you be wasting your time on the other things? Rather than letting Taoist friend run around for nothing, I might as well take them all. Hearing this, Yingpu was silent for a moment and stretched out his hand. Those were obviously demon claws covered in light brown fur. Xiao Hua smiled and stretched out his hand to shake Yingpu's hand. The brown fur on Yingpu's hand was very sharp and prickly. However, Xiao Hua looked straight at Yingpu's face that was hidden in the armor and didn't care at all. Taoist friend is the first trustworthy person I met in the hidden immortal continent. Yingpu looked into Xiao Hua's eyes and said in a low voice, if the first transaction was for profit, then the future transactions with Taoist master will also be for profit. Haha. Xiao Hua originally thought that Yingpu's second sentence would have a twist, but who knew that Yingpu would be so straightforward? Xiao Hua couldn't help but laugh. Taoist master, please don't laugh. For the survival of my clan, profit is the most important thing. Of course, other than profit, I will do my best, and even use the power of my entire clan to serve Taoist master Xiao. Yingpu said immediately. After speaking, Yingpu let go of his hand, and Xiao Hua also withdrew his hand with a smile. Xiao Hua naturally didn't think that what Yingpu said was the same as what Ao Zhantian and the others said, so he said with a smile, to be able to obtain Taoist friend's trust, I am also honored. However, I don't know if the primeval stones I took out are enough. If not, how much more do you need? I will make up for it. Yingpu asked the two demons several times in a low voice and then said with a smile, Taoist master has more than enough. My clan is very satisfied. If Taoist doesn't have anything else, I will take my leave. I will find the things and send them to the place Taoist master wants. After sending Yingpu off, Fairy Jing brought Changyu and Wu Tianfei over and said with a smile, Taoist master Xiao has friends all over the world. Even the demons of the 1,000-demon sacred realm are old acquaintances. Not at all, not at all. Xiao Hua waved his hand. It's just that we met during the negotiation. Fellow Taoist Xiao, the items in the 1,000-demon sacred realm are indeed suitable for Taoist cultivators, but most of them are harmful to the physical body. Fairy Jing reminded him with concern. Fellow Taoist, you must be extremely careful when using them. Yes, thank you for your reminder. Xiao Hua naturally knew that Fairy Jing had good intentions and agreed with a smile. Fairy Jing then asked, also, Fellow Xiao, where are you going instead of returning to the Black Wind Ridge to cultivate? Hee, Fairy, don't be anxious. Come with me to watch a good show, and then I'll tell you. Xiao Hua giggled. He waved his hand and brought Fairy Jing, Changyu, and the others to where the alliance was. Not to mention Fairy Jing, even Changyu and Wu Tian were confused. They didn't know what Xiao Hua meant. However, when they saw Xue Ping hurriedly flying out of the barracks before Xiao Hua landed, Changyu and Wu Tian thought of something. Senior. Xue Ping's face was filled with ecstasy. He bowed and greeted. Junior congratulates Senior on leaving the Jadestige gathering unscathed. Yes. Xiao Hua didn't stop and landed in the largest tent in the alliance. He said as he flew, Is your monarch still here? Yes. Xue Ping hurriedly followed. Although he didn't know why Xiao Hua was moving forward in such a hurry, he didn't dare to ask. He smiled and said, My monarch is a benevolent monarch. He emphasizes finishing what he started. He definitely won't leave the Jadestige gathering early. Although there was news before noon that not many cultivators could leave the Jadestige gathering, my monarch still waited here and prepared to be the last to leave. Good. Xiao Hua looked at the tent that was getting closer and closer. He narrowed his eyes and said, Did you mention me to Xiao Jun? Xue Ping shrunk his neck and said in a low voice, Junior didn't dare to forget Senior's instructions. Junior didn't mention it. I hope Senior can give my monarch a surprise. Ha ha ha, of course, I'll definitely give Xiao Jun a surprise. Xiao Hua laughed loudly. His laughter actually had a different meaning. Xue Ping was stunned and looked at Xiao Hua in surprise. After all, from Xiao Hua's tone, He seemed to be familiar with Xiao Jun. Then, seeing that Xiao Hua was already dozens of feet away from the tent, Shui Ping hurriedly reminded him, say, "Senior, my monarch's tent is right in front. Please, please wait for a moment. Allow Junior to inform him." Shui Ping's forehead was already sweating when he said this, and he was stuttering a little. He already felt that something was amiss. When he thought about it carefully, he immediately realized that there was something strange about it. "There's no need to inform him," Xiao Hua said coldly. Shui Ping's heart clenched and he opened his mouth. But, yes, although Xiao Hua was a nascent soul senior and looked down on Xiao Jun, this was the military camp of the Chanyang Kingdom after all. This tent was the golden tent of the monarch of the Chanyang Kingdom. Xiao Hua clearly didn't care about Xiao Jun and the Chanyang Kingdom by barging in so openly. "Who dares to barge into my monarch's golden tent?" As he spoke, several cultivators dressed in different clothes flew out from the left side of the tent. The cultivator at the front, who was at the 3rd grade of Essence Force, shouted coldly, "Humph!" Xiao Hua snorted coldly. With a sweep of his divine sense, these cultivators stopped in their tracks and hugged their heads with their hands, as if they were in extreme pain. "Hee, you two are indeed here. I'm sure you already know why I'm here." Xiao Hua swept his gaze and saw 2 old men in the middle of these cultivators. One of the old men was holding a Buddhist staff. Weren't they the 2 people who protected Xiao Jian while playing chess in front of the Tidal River Temple? Xiao Hua, you're Xiao Hua." Once Xiao Hua spoke, the 2 old men naturally came to their senses. They had seen Xiao Hua and Xiao Jian being intimate, so how could they not know the relationship between Xiao Hua and Xiao Jian? Xiao Hua's appearance didn't change much, but after all, his bearing could change people. How could the current Xiao Hua be compared to the Xiao Hua who was in dire straits and wore Xiao Jian's Taoist robes? "Hurry!" The old man was about to shout a warning. Boom! Xiao Hua didn't seem to do anything, but the 2 old men were dragged out from the crowd of cultivators by Xiao Hua. No matter how they opened their mouths, they couldn't utter a single word. Shui Ping was sweating profusely. At this point, how could he not know? He had wholeheartedly wanted to find a strong helper for the single Yang Kingdom, but he didn't expect to become Xiao Jun's mortal enemy. "Say, Senior," Shui Ping hastily begged. "Shut up," Xiao Hua berated. "I know what I'm doing." Shui Ping was helpless. He bit his lip and turned to look behind Xiao Hua. Fairy Jing had long concealed her cultivation and looked similar to Changyu and the others. The 3 of them were astonished at first, but when they saw that there were people from the Buddhist sect among these cultivators, they calmed down and thought that there was a rift between Xiao Hua and the Buddhist sect. Therefore, they ignored Shui Ping's gaze. Woo! Xiao Hua flew to the front of the golden tent and raised his hand. The many soldiers standing guard in front of the golden tent were swept aside by the hurricane, and the tent door was immediately opened. Xiao Hua sneered as he landed in front of the tent door. He didn't even look at the nearby armored soldiers who were rushing over. He stepped into the golden tent and said, "Xiao Jun, your enemy asked me to come see you. Are you ready? Are you going to return the throne you snatched from someone else? Do you want me to take your head? Or do you want to deliver it to me? Do you want me to take away your throne? Or do you want me to take away your single Yang Kingdom?" Boom! Upon hearing this, Shui Ping's head went blank. His body trembled in midair, and he almost fell. Naturally, there were many people inside the golden tent. In front of him were several generals with shining weapons in their hands. Their faces were vigilant as they blocked Xiao Hua's path. Behind these generals were several Buddhist protectors. Each of them held a Buddhist weapon in their hands as they looked at Xiao Hua with bright eyes. Layers of telekinesis were emitted from their bodies. Behind these people was a tall and sturdy monarch wearing an apricot yellow hat and a bright yellow embroidered dragon robe. He was frowning as he looked at Xiao Hua with a puzzled expression. Of course, when this monarch saw Xiao Hua's appearance, he immediately understood something and his face revealed a trace of relief. Xiao Hua walked into the golden tent and narrowed his eyes to look at the monarch's appearance. He saw that Xiao Jun, whom he had never met before, looked completely different from Xiao Jian. Xiao Jian was a wretched old man, but this Xiao Jun was not only tall, but also had a dignified appearance. He had a square face and large eyes under his thick eyebrows flashed with a dignified divine light. He had a dignified appearance, and even his mottled white hair made others feel a sense of respect. What? He looked at Xiao Jun and coldly said, "You want to fight with this old man?" Without waiting for Xiao Jun to reply, Xiao Hua took a step forward. An invisible force pushed the general, who was at least a grade 2 origin energy, to the side. That general clenched his teeth and raised the treasured saber in his hand. Before he could do anything, humph! Xiao Hua coldly snorted. That general immediately flew away from Xiao Hua's eyes. With a peub sound, he crashed into the side of the golden tent and fell to the ground. "Protect the emperor! Protect the emperor!" A Buddhist cultivator in front of Xiao Jun shouted as he prepared to take out his Buddhist weapon. "Stop!" Xiao Jun shouted. His face was calm as he said, "This is my private matter. It has nothing to do with you. Don't worry, monarch." Even if this cultivator, how could the Buddhist sect cultivators give up? But before they could say anything, Fairy Jing let out a cold snort and released the pressure of a nascent soul cultivator. The Buddhist sect cultivators were all submerged by this pressure and found it difficult to even open their mouths. Fortunately, Fairy Jing only revealed a bit of her power and immediately withdrew her pressure. The cultivators in the tent were all shocked. That's right, a nascent soul cultivator who came out of the Jade Pavilion conference should have just experienced a life and death situation. How could these people compare to her? -13. Chapter 3671. All of you, retreat. Xiao Jun remained calm. Although his face was pale, he could still stand there and barely resist the power of a nascent soul cultivator. "My lord," all the cultivators and generals said in unison, "we would rather die in front of my lord than retreat." "Retreat." Xiao Jun waved his hand and said, "This is my family's matter, not the country's. You all are not allowed to interfere." This? The cultivators looked at each other and replied in unison, "Yes." However, they all retreated to the edge of the golden tent and didn't leave. AI. Seeing the reaction of the cultivators and soldiers, Xiao Jun sighed. He looked at Xiao Hua and bowed. "Junior Xiao Jun greets Senior Xiao." Xiao Hua nodded and didn't return the greeting. He walked in front of Xiao Jun and said, "You're enjoying being the monarch. Isn't it time to return it to Xiao Jian?" Xiao Jun didn't find it strange at all. He took a deep breath and looked at Xueping behind Xiao Hua and the two Buddhist disciples behind the tent. He said, "Actually, when I heard that Xiao Jian was protected by a Taoist expert and Xueping said so, I knew that sooner or later, Senior would find me, two state teachers." Xiao Hua sneered. "That day, I thought it was strange how two Buddhist disciples with second-grade essence power could become the state teachers of the single Yang kingdom. It seems like it was just a fake edict." Xiao Jun ignored Xiao Hua's mockery. He looked at the people around him, then looked at the falling snow outside the tent. He faintly said, "Junior's throne was originally seized from Brother Wang's hands. Junior has always felt guilty. Even though I poured my heart and soul into state affairs, I still couldn't remove it. Since Brother Wang wants to take back the throne today, then Junior will return it to Brother Wang. Senior, please tell Brother Wang that I hope he will treat his people well after taking over the throne." At this moment, a gust of wind blew from behind Xiao Jun. An old woman in plain clothes rushed out from behind the golden screen. Her hair was white, and her face was covered by a silk handkerchief, so her appearance couldn't be seen clearly. However, as soon as the old woman came out, she immediately stood in front of Xiao Jun facing Xiao Hua's might. She was not afraid at all. She only coldly said, "Who said my husband's throne was stolen?" Others might not be able to recognize Xiao Jian's true face, but how could this servant not know Xiao Jian's background? Xiao Jian is a selfish person who seeks nothing but profit and is addicted to gambling. How can Senior believe the words of such a person? If Senior insists on listening to only one side of the story, if you agree that you are doing the Tao of Heaven, that you are replacing the people of the single Yang kingdom to choose the king, and that you want to take my husband's life, then I am willing to let my husband die. I hope this servant's death can give Xiao Jian an explanation and allow Senior to calm down for a moment." Gigi. Xiao Jun reached out to pull the old woman away and said in a low voice, "This has nothing to do with you. This is a grudge between Xiao Jian and me. Don't get involved." "How can this servant not get involved?" The old woman named Gigi clearly knew that today's matter would not have a good ending. She said somewhat agitatedly, "As early as 40 years ago, you said that this was a matter between you and Xiao Jian, and you didn't want this servant to get involved. And the result? You were deceived by Xiao Jian, and for the so-called family affection, you abandoned this servant. This servant tearfully obeyed royal father's order to marry Xiao Jian, making him the king of the single Yang kingdom. After that, Xiao Jian didn't care about the court, and for the sake of cockfighting, he neglected the country's affairs and even lost several border cities to other countries. This servant came to you to discuss it, but you said that this was a matter between men, and you didn't want this servant to get involved. After that, this servant chased Xiao Jian off the throne and wanted to imprison him. You said that this was a matter of the country, and you didn't want this servant to get involved. Not only did you let Xiao Jian go, you even sent experts to protect him. Look, what did your kindness get in return? It was Xiao Jian's revenge. Xiao Jian repaid kindness with enmity. This monarch can't ask about other people's matters. This monarch only wants to have a clear conscience." Xiao Jun reached out to hold Gigi's hand and said warmly, "Moreover, Xiao Jian is this monarch's brother and your husband. This monarch can't let you and I carry infamy. Since today's grudge has come to an end, you don't need to think about other things. All of this was done by this monarch, and it has nothing to do with you." Finished speaking, Xiao Jun looked at Xiao Hua and said, "Senior Xiao, you and I have the same surname. This junior doesn't dare to climb up to the same sect. I ask senior to be lenient and just take this junior's life. Gigi is Xiao Jian's original wife, and I presume that he didn't ask senior to take Gigi's life, right?" Xiao Jian didn't mention this. Xiao Hua lightly nodded. "In the heavens, we are willing to be lovebirds, and on earth, we are willing to be intertwined branches. Even if this servant dies, this servant wants to be a mandarin duck with the same name as my husband," Gigi said affectionately. "In this life, this servant will only recognize Xiao Jun as my husband. Xiao Jian is nothing more than a treacherous rascal." Facing these two people who were unafraid of death, Xiao Hua was a bit embarrassed. He knew of Xiao Jian's selfishness and his addiction to gambling. However, he didn't expect that Xiao Jian, Xiao Jun, and Gigi had such a deep relationship. Moreover, Xiao Jian's position of monarch was taken away by Xiao Jun, but this position was originally passed down by Gigi's father. If Gigi took it away, it could be considered as returning it to its rightful owner. Especially if it was as Gigi said, Xiao Jian wasn't a qualified monarch, and Xiao Jun was the wise monarch that Xue Ping spoke of. How could Xiao Hua give the position of monarch to Xiao Jian? Taoist Xiao. At this moment, the others didn't dare to speak. Fairy Jing, who was behind him, opened her mouth and said, "This servant can't discern the words of others, but this woman's words, this servant can tell that they come from the bottom of her heart. Has Taoist Xiao been bewitched by others? This servant hopes that Taoist Xiao can be a bit more lenient and carefully investigate before speaking again." And Xiao Hua nodded and said, "It seems that this matter is far from as simple as this Xiao thought. This Xiao might even be wrong." "All of you can leave," Fairy Jing said indifferently. "If Taoist Xiao wants to make a move, it's useless for all of you to stay here. All of you can leave." Xiao Jun waved his hand and said, "Senior Xiao is here for a family matter. It has nothing to do with all of you." However, the soldiers and cultivators were still somewhat unwilling. "Quickly leave," Gigi said coldly. "This old woman is going to talk about some family scandals. Do you all want to listen?" Yes, yes. Gigi's words were still the most effective. Everyone hurriedly bowed and quietly retreated to the sides. Looking at the peaceful tent, Xiao Jun pulled Gigi's hand and walked down from the seat of honor. He bowed and said, "Senior, please take a seat." And Xiao Hua didn't hold back. He walked to the back of the jade table and sat down. He said to Chang Yu and Wu Tian, "The two of you can leave. I'll talk to Xiao Jun." "Yes, master." Chang Yu and Wu Tian hurriedly left the tent. Fairy Jing's beautiful eyes swept over and said with a smile, "Since it's your Xiao family's matter, it's not convenient for this servant to listen. I'll leave for a moment. Xiaohua thought for a moment and nodded. Very well. Fairy Jing, please wait outside for a moment. After Fairy Jing left, Xiaohua looked at Xiao Jun's slightly calm face and said, Tell me the matter between you and Xiao Jian. No matter how big or small it is, tell me everything. Yes, senior. Seeing Xiaohua's tone as a senior of the Xiao family, the Xiao family didn't dare to be negligent and told the whole story in detail. The matter was far more complicated than Xiaohua imagined. Xiao Jun and Xiao Jian were cousins. They were from the side branch of the Xiao family of the Single Yang country. The Xiao family had some influence in the Single Yang country and was a big family that the king of the Single Yang country wanted to rope in. Xiao Jun and Xiao Jian had a good relationship since childhood. Xiao Jian's character wasn't good and others didn't like him. However, Xiao Jun was magnanimous and didn't care about Xiao Jian's shortcomings. He could be considered one of the few family members that Xiao Jian could trust. When the two of them got older, they entered the academy of the Single Yang country to study. Although Xiao Jian's character wasn't good, he was exceptionally intelligent. His studies were outstanding, and he also stood out in Taoism cultivation. On the other hand, Xiao Jun couldn't compare to Xiao Jian in any aspect. As the princess of the Single Yang country, Gigi also studied in the academy. Naturally, she was like the moon surrounded by stars. Xiao Jian even spent a lot of effort to get close to Gigi. Unfortunately, Gigi had unique insight and didn't pay much attention to Xiao Jian. Instead, she was especially close to Xiao Jun. Thus, Xiao Jian pretended to be drunk and confided in front of Xiao Jun that he wouldn't marry anyone other than Gigi. Xiao Jun fell for it and reluctantly dropped out of the academy. He was even punished by the Xiao family. Later, the king of the Single Yang country selected a son-in-law from the Imperial Academy. Xiao Jian stood out and obtained the king's favor. Of course, when the king was alive, Xiao Jian pretended very well. He handled the affairs of the country and family cleanly without any mistakes. Although Gigi's heart wasn't with Xiao Jian, she didn't think too much about it for the sake of the Single Yang country. However, when the king passed away, Xiao Jian took control of the country and immediately revealed his true nature. Not only did he begin to neglect the affairs of the country, he even learned cockfighting from an unknown disciple. For a time, cockfighting became the norm in the Single Yang country, and no one paid attention to the affairs of the country. Because of this, Gigi also paid a visit to the state preceptor of the Single Yang country and begged him to step in. However, the state preceptor was at the juncture of cultivating his golden core. How could he care about the life and death of the Single Yang country? He didn't pay attention to it at all. In the end, when Xiao Jian lost the 3 border cities to the neighboring country and wanted to gamble again, Gigi couldn't bear it anymore. She contacted Xiao Jun and found a Buddhist sect expert who was also looking for help in the hidden immortal continent. In one fell swoop, Xiao Jian was kicked off the throne. The Golden Core State Preceptor was also expelled from the Single Yang country by the Buddhist sect expert. From then on, Xiao Jun established the country with the Buddhist sect and sat on the throne of the Single Yang country. Oh, if what you said is true. After listening to Xiao Jun's analysis, Xiao Hua said indifferently, this old man was wrong. Oh, right, Gigi, what happened to your face? Gigi wasn't surprised. She took off the handkerchief on her face and saw that the left side of Gigi's face was densely covered with a layer of purple pimples. It was very frightening. Gigi said indifferently, Senior, please no. I also don't know what happened. Ever since Xiao Jun left the Imperial Academy, my face has been covered with pimples. Father searched everywhere for a divine doctor, but to no avail. Previously, there were only 1 or 2 pimples, but later on, half of my face was covered with them. If it wasn't for my face, how could Xiao Jian be chosen by Father so easily? -13. Chapter 3672. Speaking of this, Gigi rejoiced again. It is also because of this disease that Xiao Jian has never touched me since we got married. I have always let the maidservants by my side accompany me. Only then can I keep Xiao Jun's chastity. Xiao Hua was quite moved and looked at Xiao Jun. Xiao Jun, you don't dislike Gigi's face. What Junior doesn't like is the disease on Gigi's face, not Gigi's face. Xiao Jun didn't dare to hide and said in a low voice, facing Gigi's heart, That kind of trust and affection is enough to drown this kind of dislike. Thinking back to those days, in the bamboo pavilion after the rain, Gigi half closed her fan. This kind of memory is enough for Junior to be drunk for the rest of Junior's life. You are telling the truth. Gigi slightly curled her lips. Can't you say that you don't dislike it? Xiaojun smiled and didn't refute. Where was the majestic appearance of a monarch from before? Gigi said to Xiaohua again. Junior knows that men like beauty, so I have always used a handkerchief to cover it. Previously, Junior still had some doubts about Xiaojun, but after so many years, he didn't find someone to serve him like Xiaojian. What else can Junior say? Good, good, good. Xiaohua praised 3 times. What an affectionate and righteous monarch. Senior praises too much. Love fills one's stomach. Junior doesn't feel that there is anything special. Xiaojun answered honestly again. Che. Although Xiaohua didn't say anything, he was cursing in his heart. He secretly curled his lips and said, extinguishing the candle? Isn't it the same? Of course you don't care too much. This old man is also someone who has experienced it. Then, Xiaohua stood up and said, Xiaojun, don't be too proud. This old man has heard your and Xiaojian's words, but each of you has your own reasons, so this old man can't jump to conclusions. However, based on the affection between you and Gigi, this old man won't take your life. As for whether or not you should give up your throne, this old man will go to Danliang country to take a look. Remember, don't try to send any information to Danliang country, that will be even worse for you. Xiaojun listened and said with a smile, Senior, don't worry, Junior has a clear conscience, but I ask Senior to investigate openly and secretly. Good. Xiaohua clapped his hands and beckoned. Gigi, come here. Let this old man see your face. Huh. Gigi's body trembled, and her voice trembled. Senior, do you have any ideas? I don't know. Xiaohua lightly said. If you're willing, this old man can give it a try. Xiaojun said anxiously from the side. If Senior has a way, Junior is willing to give up the throne. Why would I want your throne? Isn't it tiring enough? Xiaohua waved his hand, stretched out his hand, and squeezed the purple lump on Gigi's face. Then, he put his finger in front of his nose and smelled it for a moment. After that, he frowned and said, This is the poison of the bamboo heart. It's caused by the birth of insects in the bamboo heart in a cold place. It's quite rare. Do you particularly like bamboo? Yes, my house in the Imperial Academy is all made of bamboo. Seeing Xiaohua expose her in a single breath, Gigi couldn't help but tremble again. She hurriedly replied, moreover, that bamboo house doesn't see the sun all year round. When you go back, move away the thing blocking the bamboo house, or burn the bamboo house. Xiaohua waved his hand and said. Gigi smiled bitterly. That bamboo house has already been burned by Xiaojin. Oh. Xiaohua understood that this was Xiaojin's action of being jealous of Xiaojun and Gigi's relationship. He replied, This old man can cure this poison. Plop. Xiaojun no longer cared about his status as a monarch. He knelt in front of Xiaohua and begged, Senior, please help. Half a day later, 4 figures flew out from the alliance of the Single Yang Kingdom and headed towards the direction of the Single Yang Kingdom. After flying for an hour, seeing that the snowflakes gradually stopped, Fairy Jing was puzzled and asked, Fellow Taoist Xiao, since you have already treated Gigi's illness, and you think that Xiaojun is a loyal and affectionate monarch, then why do you still have to make a trip to the Single Yang Kingdom? What I have heard and what I have seen are not important. Xiaohua smiled and said, The most important thing is the choice of the people of the Single Yang Kingdom. Moreover, whether Xiaojin's words are true or not, is too important to the Jiang country. Therefore, I have no choice but to make a trip to the Single Yang Kingdom. Of course, Fairy Jing didn't know what Xiaohua was thinking. She didn't ask and only smiled. Is this the reason why you didn't return to the Black Wind Ridge? Not all. Xiaohua shook his head and said, I didn't return because someone else did. They are more suitable than me. Oh, them? Fairy Jing turned to look at Chang Yu and Wu Tian and asked curiously, Just the 2 of them? How can they compare to a real person? Of course it's not them. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously and said, I have even better help. Fellow Taoist also knows how to keep people in suspense. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense and pointed to the distance and said, "Let's go. When we get there, I will ask my helper to come out and meet with Fairy Jing." Ask him to come out? Fairy Jing was even more bewildered. Fellow Taoist can't have brought out the fellow Taoist from the Jade Pavilion meeting in his Chinkuan bag, right? Ha ha ha, that's right. Can't I? Xiao Hua laughed. When they landed on the foot of the mountain, Xiao Hua looked around and threw out a jade talisman. After setting up the capital star array, he made a grabbing motion with his hand. A dozen waves rose from the foot of the mountain and sealed the space within a few hundred meters. This is the great heavenly cycle. Star array? Fairy Jing's gaze was a bit blank and her mouth was bitter. Looking at the changing scenery around her, she couldn't help but blurt out in disbelief. Xiao Hua smiled and nodded. Fairy Jing has good eyesight. However, this star array isn't complete. I still haven't figured out a few parts. It's not a few parts, it's 100. Fairy Jing stopped being surprised and said with a smile, "As far as I know, the great heavenly cycle star array needs 365 talismans. Fellow Taoist Xiao just cast out less than 100. At this point, Fairy Jing suddenly realized something, and her face flushed. She smiled and said, "I understand. Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed an unparalleled talent. You can already set up a simple great heavenly cycle star array with the least number of talismans. Fairy Jing, if you like it, when this matter is over, follow me back to Black Wind Ridge. There is a relatively intact great heavenly cycle star array there." Xiao Hua invited her in a timely manner. However, Fairy Jing didn't agree as readily as Xiao Hua expected. Instead, she hesitated and finally lowered her head, saying, "We'll see." "Okay." Xiao Hua didn't think much and patted his head. Buzz! The mountain and river seal made a rumbling sound and flew out of his meridians. Waves of dragon chi filled the array. This is the Nation weapon? Fairy Jing was naturally an experienced and knowledgeable person. When she saw Xiao Hua take out the mountain and river seal, she immediately understood something. However, she was a bit confused and stared at Xiao Hua, as if she wanted to see something from him. Xiao Hua patted his hand, and Su Tingzi and the 9 golden core cultivators flew out of the mountain and river seal and landed on the ground. Although Su Tingzi's cultivation hadn't fully recovered, his face was already flushed, and the magic power around him was faintly surging. He should be fine. The other 9 golden core cultivators also seemed to have restrained their divine light. Although it was unknown how much their injuries had recovered, it seemed that Xiao Hua's pills had already taken effect. Su Tingzi stood on the ground and looked around. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist Xiao, have you left Yaodai Mountain?" "Greetings, Senior Xiao." The 9 golden core cultivators hurriedly bowed and stood beside Xiao Hua. They had already sworn a blood oath on Yaodai Mountain, so they were naturally considered Xiao Hua's disciples. "Of course I left Yaodai Mountain." Xiao Hua smiled and pointed at Fairy Jing. "Come, let me introduce you. This is Fairy Jing, and this is Su Tingzi." "Greetings, Fairy Jing." "Greetings, fellow Taoist Su Tingzi." The two of them exchanged some pleasantries. Xiao Hua then pointed at the 9 Jindan cultivators and said, "These 9 cultivators swore a blood oath within the Yaodai Mountain's Grand Formation to pledge their loyalty to me. I then brought them out of the Yaodai Mountain." Afterward, Xiao Hua pointed at Changyu and Wu Tian and said to the 9 people, "These are my disciples. You should familiarize yourselves with them first." "Yes." Changyu saw that the 9 were all late-stage golden core cultivators and knew that they would be Xiao Hua's helpers in the future. He obediently agreed and brought Wu Tian to greet the 9 golden core cultivators. Taking advantage of the golden core cultivators' greetings, Xiao Hua smiled and said to Su Tingzi, "Fellow Taoist Su Tingzi, I've already fulfilled my promise to you. Our cooperation on Yaodai Mountain ends here. Fellow Taoist, you can leave now." Don't worry. Su Tingzi waved his hand and said, "I missed the show on Yaodai Mountain in order to lure the enemy. I still want to listen to Taoist Zhao's explanation. Oh, actually, I was also injured by the formation in the end." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "In the end, I was still discovered by Fairy Jing and was brought out of Yaodai Mountain by her. How is that possible? Su Tingzi couldn't believe it. Even with fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation, you were still heavily injured? Nothing's impossible, Xiaohua said indifferently. This time, less than 20% of the golden core cultivators and less than 40% of the nascent soul cultivators were able to come down from Yaodai Mountain. It's normal for me to be injured. Ah? So many Taoist disciples died. Su Tingzi was flabbergasted, but he also felt lucky in his heart. Fairy Jing nodded. What fellow Taoist Xiao said is true. I followed Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong and killed several large formations. If fellow Taoist Su Tingzi wants to listen, I can tell you one by one. Okay, I'm all ears. Su Tingzi obviously wanted to listen. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua smiled and said, "Don't be anxious. If you want to listen, let's listen together." Ah, there are more people? Su Tingzi and Fairy Jing were stunned. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously and shook out two late-stage nascent soul cultivators, Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian, from the mountain and river seal. Then, dozens of golden core cultivators fell out like dumplings. Su Tingzi and Fairy Jing were dumbfounded. Although the two of them were both early-stage and mid-stage nascent soul cultivators and weren't very famous, Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian were late-stage nascent soul cultivators comparable to Taoist Huada. The two of them could recognize them at a glance. They never thought that the two of them would come out of Xiaohua's mountain and river seal. -13. Chapter 3673. Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian were stunned at first, but they soon understood. They looked at each other and greeted Xiaohua. Su Tingzi and Fairy Jing also hurried over. After the dozens of golden core cultivators greeted them, they also walked over to Changyu and Wu Tian and greeted each other again. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Xiaohua smiled again after the situation calmed down. There are still some fellow Taoists who haven't arrived yet. Puff, puff, puff. The mountain river seal trembled again, one after another. Fairy Jing was flabbergasted as more than 30 nascent soul cultivators and dozens of golden core cultivators walked out. It wasn't just Fairy Jing, Changyu, and Wu Tian. Even Su Tingzi, Shui Mingzi, Ao Zhantian, and the other nascent soul cultivators who were brought out by Xiaohua were dumbfounded. After all, they were taken in by Xiaohua one by one, so they couldn't see anything. Now that they all came out, they could see the results. These were dozens of nascent soul cultivators and hundreds of golden core cultivators. Which country or Taoist cultivator could control so many nascent soul and golden core cultivators? There were dozens of nascent soul cultivators, early, mid, and late nascent soul cultivators, and some of them were familiar with each other. At this moment, those who knew each other greeted each other, and those who didn't know each other introduced themselves. It was a lively scene. Apart from Xiaohua, who stood at the head of the table, Fairy Jing, Su Tingzi, and the others were also present. Fairy Jing, in particular, was tactful enough to sneak into the group of mid-nascent soul cultivators and exchange greetings with a few of them. After the time it took to eat half a meal, the noise in the hall gradually died down. Xiaohua looked around and coughed twice, then raised his voice. Fellow Taoists, although everyone was talking, they were all paying attention to Xiaohua. When they heard Xiaohua speak, everyone immediately stopped. Ao Zhantian and the other late nascent soul cultivators stood at the front, while the other cultivators lined up according to their cultivation. They all bowed and said, "Thank you, Taoist Xiao, for saving our lives." As he looked at the nascent soul stage and golden core stage cultivators that filled the place, Xiaohua's little tail was slightly raised. Right, when Xiaohua was on the Dawn Rain continent, he had only seen a few nascent soul stage cultivators. Now, these nascent soul stage cultivators that were comparable in number to the Dawn Rain continent had to bow down to him and even serve him for 1,000 years. How could Xiaohua not be complacent? However, Xiaohua's complacency only lasted for a moment. He immediately raised his hand and said with a smile, "Everyone, there's no need to thank me. This is also a coincidence. Moreover, the heavenly Tao didn't want to cut off the descendants of my Tao sect, so it borrowed my hand. If you want to thank someone, you have to thank the Tao sect seniors in the heavens." Hee. Ao Zhantian smiled bitterly as he looked at Xiaohua's harmless smile. He felt extremely bitter in his heart. He had seen Xiao Hua's angry smile before. The soaring dragon shears were even sharper than a sword, hanging above his head. Why didn't the senior from the Taoism appear at that time? Why did he have to swear a blood oath and serve Xiao Hua for 1,000 years to come up with an excuse? Similarly, Xiao Hua didn't care about what others thought and said, "This is also a sign of the prosperity of my Tao sect. You may not know that the Jade Pavilion meeting this time is a trap for Star-Lord Hall to massacre my Tao sect cultivators." At this point, Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at Fairy Jing. Fairy Jing hid among the nascent soul cultivators and gave Xiao Hua a desperate look. It seemed that she didn't intend to speak. Xiao Hua smiled. He naturally understood what Fairy Jing was thinking. He had obtained the memories of Sun Horse of Star and Tail Fire Tiger. After coming out, he also listened to Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong's analysis. Naturally, he knew more than Fairy Jing. It was naturally more appropriate for him to explain than Fairy Jing. Then, Xiao Hua explained the arrangements and plans of the Confucian cultivators on the Jade Mountain, as well as the losses of the Tao sect cultivators. All the cultivators present, whether they were early Golden Core or late nascent soul cultivators, had a great change in expression. The trace of dissatisfaction and unhappiness in their hearts from being forced to swear allegiance had now completely turned into rejoicing. If they hadn't met Xiao Hua, they would have already fallen on the Jade Mountain. Since they could live, why should they care too much? After Xiao Hua finished speaking, he looked at the changes in everyone's expressions and said with a smile, "Since the Tao sect seniors borrowed this Xiao to rescue you, then this Xiao would like to thank the Tao sect seniors for giving this Xiao an opportunity to work together with everyone to contribute to the Tao sect of the hidden immortal continent." At this point, Xiao Hua didn't wait for everyone to speak and immediately changed the topic. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "Actually, I won't hide it from everyone. When it comes to contributing to the Tao sect of the hidden immortal continent, this Xiao also feels that it's a bit empty. Long before this Xiao came to the Jade Mountain, this Xiao only had one goal, which was to get the Imperial Preceptor's signature and establish my own country. I want to be a comfortable retired emperor and enjoy the happiness of one side. Even when I saw all of you, I only felt a kind of warmth and emotion. To be able to gather so many Taoist cultivators together in the hidden immortal continent, where there are so many Confucian cultivators, is really a very happy thing. It's far more interesting than this Xiao hiding in the cave and quietly cultivating. Therefore, I have a wish. Even if we don't contribute to the Taoist sect, even if we don't fight against the Confucian cultivators, even if we drink wine and enjoy the flowers and talk about the sword when we are busy, I want to gather all of you together so that we can enjoy the joy of cultivation." The happiness of cultivation? All the cultivators were dumbfounded. This was the first time they'd heard of the phrase, the joy of cultivation. Perhaps they'd experienced this sort of joy when they just entered the aura refining realm. It was the pleasure of grasping a divine ability for the first time, a comfort that surpassed that of ordinary people. However, as their cultivation grew more difficult and as the years passed, this sort of joy had long since disappeared. Aside from foul winds and bloody rain, there was only infighting and scheming, and even mutual deception. One bottleneck needed to be broken through one after another, one opponent needed to be killed one after another, one conspiracy needed to be cracked one after another. This kind of endless life seemed to have become the main theme of cultivation, making them unable to see any hope. Sometimes, many people would ask themselves, why did they cultivate? Was it for the sake of divine ability, magic power, lifespan? They had divine ability, they also had magic power, and their lifespan was even more extraordinary. However, when thousands of years of cultivation were dominated by boredom, slaughter, and fear, who would still think about the benefits of lifespan? Where was the happiness? Of course, everyone was different. There were also many ambitious cultivators who found their own position in this long cultivation life and found the so-called happiness of cultivation. Seeing everyone in a daze, Xiao Hua faintly smiled and said, "Confucian cultivators often say that there is beauty in books, and there is a house of gold in books. This Xiao doesn't know whether there is beauty in books or not, but this Xiao knows that this is the happiness of Confucian cultivators. Since the cultivation of Confucian cultivators is so happy, why can't the cultivation of Taoism be happy? Of course, This Xiao also doesn't know what this happiness is. I will have to ask everyone to search for it together with this Xiao. Once again, this Xiao thanks everyone. When everyone heard this, they understood that Xiao Hua was helping them cover up the awkwardness of being forced to work for them. They were at a loss because they didn't know whether Xiao Hua's words were true or false. They didn't know what this happiness of cultivation was. Good. Taoist Zhao's words have broken the sky in the well. This old man's Tao heart has been shaken. This so-called happiness of cultivation, this old man has never thought about it before. After cultivating for thousands of years, this old man should calm down and think about it carefully. Taoist Xiao, this old man wants to go to the Black Wind Mountain Range to study the Tao with Taoist Xiao. I don't know if Taoist Xiao will allow it. Shui Mingzi understood Xiao Hua's thoughts. Xiao Hua laughed and cupped his hands. Taoist Shui Mingzi can go? How can this Xiao not be happy? We will only study the Tao and discuss the Tao, not fight to the death. We will only see the Tao of heaven and not talk about the difference between Confucian and Taoist. Good. This old man also wants to go. Ao Zhantian hurriedly clapped his hands. Seeing that Xiao Hua had given them such a big step and such a great ambition, how could the cultivators who had made the blood oath not know how to take advantage of the situation? In the end, even the cultivators who hadn't sworn blood oaths were overjoyed. It was rare for them to be so enthusiastic about the same thing. Good. Xiao Hua waved his hand and a large pile of jade eyes flew out. This is the location of the Black Wind Mountain Range and a message from this Xiao. Take it and go. Fellow Taoists, you are all people with great achievements in cultivation. You are all trustworthy. I look forward to drinking and chatting with you fellow Taoists a year later. This old man will definitely go. I hope Taoist Zhao's immortal wine can satisfy this old man. Ao Zhantian took the jade eyes with a smile. He looked around and said, Taoist Xiao, please open the formation. This old man doesn't have the ability to break Taoist Zhao's formation. Hee, fellow Taoist Ao, please. Xiao Hua smiled and opened a corner of the capital Heaven Star formation. Ao Zhantian didn't stand on ceremony and cupped his hands. This old man will take his leave first. We will meet again at the Black Wind Mountain Range. Please. Xiao Hua returned the gesture and sent Ao Zhantian away. Seeing Ao Zhantian leave so easily, Shui Mingzi and the others were relieved. They said their goodbyes and left. Soon, only Fairy Jing, Su Tingzi, and Xiong Yi were left in the formation. There were also about 20 golden core cultivators. Su Tingzi didn't say anything. He frowned as if he was thinking about something. Xiong Yi also had a puzzled look on his face. He seemed to want to ask Xiao Hua something, so he didn't leave. Neither of them had sworn blood oaths to Xiao Hua, so Xiao Hua couldn't force them. He turned to look at the 20 golden core cultivators. Apart from Chang Yu and Wu Tian, the 20 golden core cultivators all knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Master, this disciple sincerely wants to become your disciple. Please accept us. Hiss. Fairy Jing sucked in a breath of cold air. Su Tingzi's expression changed slightly. As for Xiong Yi, his eyes flashed with a hint of fanaticism. Get up. Xiao Hua helped the golden core cultivators up and said with a smile, It's not impossible to become my disciple. However, this old man wants to see how your temperaments are. -13. Chapter 3674. Thank you, Master. All the Jindan stage disciples were wild with joy. After all, they knew better than anyone the difference between being an apprentice and being loyal to a master. Cultivators who had died once could see more clearly than others, and many taboos were nothing more than smoke in their eyes. I don't have the ability to guide you one by one for now. All of you stay with Changyu at the side. Once we return to Black Wind Ridge, I'll let all of you know that joining my sect is the best choice you'll ever make in your lives. Oh, it's the best choice besides joining my Tao sect. Yes, disciple understands. Xiao Hua's words were somewhat unsteady, but it made many golden core disciples feel warm in their hearts. After agreeing in unison, they stood aside. Xiongyi, Xiao Hua asked with a smile, I promised you that I would take you out of the Jade Pavilion gathering. At that time, although you said you wanted to serve me, I knew you were in a dangerous situation and had no choice but to say those words. Now, I will give you a chance. You can leave now. Taoist Master Xiao, I want to ask you a question first, then I can decide. Xiongyi said very seriously. Okay. Taoist Master, the joy of cultivation is admiring the flowers and the moon and discussing the Tao? If so, why did Taoist Master come to the Jade Pavilion gathering to snatch the Imperial Preceptor's lot? Xiongyi immediately asked. Let's not talk about cultivation first. Xiaohua smiled faintly and explained, just talking about happiness, there are many kinds of happiness in the secular world. Drinking wine can make you happy, singing can make you happy, dancing can make you happy, having a lot of friends can make you happy, having power over the world can make you happy, having millions of soldiers can make you happy, and even adjusting your breath in your spare time can make you happy. There is only one kind of happiness, but there are endless ways to be happy. Everyone's happiness may be different. I hope to pursue the happiness of cultivation, but I said before that I don't know what happiness is. That's why I want to discuss the Tao with you all. Some fellow Taoists like alchemy, maybe refining ninth-grade pills can make them happy. Some fellow Taoists like refining tools, maybe refining spiritual treasures can make them happy. Of course, there may also be fellow Taoists who like power, like building a country, like fighting against Confucian cultivators. When the purpose of building a country surpasses the needs of cultivation, this kind of fighting will naturally make fellow Taoists happy. Besides, to experience the joy of cultivation, there's a price. There's no such thing as happiness or pain for no reason in this world, especially on the hidden, immortal continent. If our Taoist cultivators want to be happy, they might have to build on the foundation of the pain of Confucian cultivators. After speaking up to here, Xiao Hua let out a long sigh and looked up into the sky. I don't dare to say that I have lofty aspirations, but I also hope that the fellow Taoists I get to know can all find their own happiness. Xiongyi smiled and said, I know a little about what you're talking about, but I'm willing to fight with those Confucian cultivators. I feel that it's more interesting than pure cultivation. Xiao Hua looks at this cultivator who didn't listen to Taoist Huada's orders at the Jade Pavilion Assembly and nods. Since I've taken the State Master's lot, I'm really going to establish a country. There won't be too few disputes with Confucian cultivators. If fellow Taoist Xiong is willing, I'd like to ask fellow Taoists to lend me a hand. All right, I'm also someone who died once. Seeing Taoist Xiao being so magnanimous and straightforward, I'm also willing to follow you and see how far our Taoist cultivators can go on the hidden immortal continent. Xiongyi resolutely kneels on the ground and says, Disciple kowtows in salute to Master. Not to mention Xiaohua himself, even Fairy Jing and the others who were watching from the side also woke up. Why did he want to take Xiongyi as his master? Xiaohua's astonishment disappeared in a flash. With a smile on his face, he said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Xiong, what do you mean? Isn't it good for you and me to be fellow Taoists? If you work for me, I won't shortchange your cultivation needs. Why do you have to take me as your master? Xiongyi raised his head and said very seriously, Disciple naturally doesn't need to explain the difference between working for me and taking me as your master. If they could be the same, these dozen or so Jindan disciples wouldn't take Senior as their master and would choose to work for you instead. Especially Disciple. I feel that I've already reached the end of this path of cultivation. I'm already powerless to struggle and unable to find the goal to move forward. Disciple needs a cultivator like Senior to guide the way for Disciple and illuminate the way forward. Moreover, Disciple wants to do, besides cultivate, Disciple wants to strengthen our Taoism. No Confucian cultivator can casually bully our Taoism disciples, and the so-called Jade Pavilion meeting can no longer be held. Disciple wants to realize this wish, but without a Taoism expert like Senior to protect Disciple, Disciple can't do it. Moreover, although Senior's cultivation is at the upper 4th level, you've already suppressed Taoist Huade, Shui Mingzi, and Ao Zhantian, 3 late nascent soul stage seniors. Stepping into the 5th level is just around the corner. At that time, the number of cultivators who want Senior's guidance will be more than the number of carps crossing the river. At that time, Senior won't be able to guide them, so Disciple might as well become Senior's disciple right now and listen to Senior's teachings. Can't guide them? A trace of doubt appeared in Xiaohua's heart, but he naturally couldn't ask. Looking at Xiongyi's face, Xiaohua naturally thought of another person. That was Daybreak Continents by Fei. That's right. It was that mercenary Changbai sect disciple, by Fei. Although this by Fei was a Dao sect disciple, during the Sword Dao battle, he used a secret technique to threaten Xiaohua in exchange for the cultivation method he wanted. Moreover, he was quick to react and had an excellent ability to judge the situation. In Xiaohua's opinion, this kind of cultivator was most suitable for cruel cultivation worlds like the Dawn Rain continent or the Hidden Immortal continent. Even now, Xiaohua had a feeling that when he left Daybreak Continent, Shi Wuming, Ruo Taohong, and Emoshan were going to that dangerous place. This by Fei would definitely follow them. Xiaohua didn't know whether Shi Wuming and the other two would be able to escape, but Xiaohua was certain that as long as there was a chance, Bai Fei would definitely be able to escape. After nearly 100 years of cultivation, Bai Fei must have reached a considerable height. On the surface, he might not be inferior to Xiaohua himself. Thinking about Bai Fei, and then looking at Xiong Yi, weren't they both the kind of cultivators who would seize every opportunity to improve their cultivation? Good. Xiaohua pondered for a moment and nodded. Since you have the heart to become my disciple, then I won't disappoint you. I'll accept you as my disciple. Fairy Jing's small mouth slightly opened. This Xiong Yi's way of accepting a master was strange, and Xiaohua's way of accepting a disciple was even more inexplicable. He didn't ask anything, didn't say anything, and just accepted an early nascent soul cultivator as his disciple. Master, please accept this disciple's bow. Xiong Yi was overjoyed and respectfully kowtowed. He kowtowed a total of 9 times before getting up. Xiaohua smiled. Xiong Yi, you are the first nascent soul disciple this old man has accepted. When this old man has time, I will properly guide your cultivation. I can't let you sully this old man's reputation. Yes, this disciple understands. This disciple will follow master's instructions. Xiong Yi very respectfully replied. He didn't feel that Xiaohua was boasting at all. And Xiaohua nodded. He looked at Changyu and the others and said, You all come and greet your senior brother. Changyu, Wu Tian, and the other Golden Core disciples were also dumbfounded. At this moment, they all rushed over to greet this senior brother who was qualified to be their master. However, everyone also heard clearly that the senior brother that Xiaohua spoke of was only senior brother. He didn't say, eldest senior brother. After everyone finished greeting each other, Xiaohua opened his mouth and said, Since you all are this old man's disciples, then you are different from others. You all don't need to return to your respective caves. Go to the Black Wind Ridge first. When you get there, Xiong Yi will first assist Li Xiang and the others in the Black Wind Ridge and establish the Jiang country that this old man promised them. With that, Xiaohua took out a jade eye from his bosom and handed it to Xiong Yi. Your identities, as well as the appearance of Li Xiang and the others, are all recorded inside. You all will know when you see it. Yes, this disciple understands. Xiong Yi respectfully received it and said, When Master returns to the Black Wind Ridge, this disciple will give Master a complete Jiang country. Master, please be the Imperial Preceptor. SK. This old man doesn't have the leisure to be the Imperial Preceptor. Xiaohua laughed and said, That's your matter. Go. Seeing that Xiaohua was urging him and didn't give him the Imperial Preceptor's lot, Xiong Yi probably already entrusted it to someone else. However, Xiong Yi didn't care. After bowing and saluting, he led the 20 or so Golden Core disciples into the sky. With a wave of his hand, a small flying boat actually landed in front of them. Dozens of people boarded the flying boat, cupped their hands towards Xiaohua again, and flew away quickly. Daoist Xiao. Seeing that there were only 3 people left in the Great Formation, Su Tingzi thought for a moment and said, This one knows that Daoist Xiao has the intention to guide me, but this one, fellow Daoist, are you afraid? Xiaohua asked, hitting the nail on the head. Su Tingzi was stunned and immediately nodded. That's right. If Daoist Xiao didn't save so many nascent soul cultivators and didn't accept so many Golden Core disciples as disciples, to be honest, this one really wants to pledge loyalty to Daoist Xiao and cultivate together with Daoist Xiao, just like in the Jade Pavilion Conference. However, Daoist Xiao's movements are really too big. Although Star-Lord Hall's Kong Hongwu might not notice Daoist Xiao right now, he will pay attention to all the Daoist cultivators who came out of the Jade Pavilion Conference. When he sees Taoist Zhao's movements, he will definitely take action. Taoist Zhao. It's not that this one doesn't have confidence in Taoist Zhao, but this one is really clear about the methods of Confucian cultivators. A small Star Lord Hall, which only controls the Jade Mountain that is several tens of thousands of li wide, was able to kill several hundred nascent soul cultivators and several thousand golden core cultivators of my Taoist sect. It can be said that they almost wiped out all the Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent. If they really send out, not to mention immortal soldiers and generals, even if several aristocratic families join forces and send out fierce generals, Taoist Zhao, do you think you can resist them? Hee, fellow Taoist, you're too extreme. Xiao Hua said with a smile. I invited these fellow Taoists here just to share the joy of cultivation with them. I didn't say that I wanted to oppose Confucian cultivators. Then what about fellow Taoist Xiong Yi? Su Tingzi stared at Xiao Hua and asked. -13. Chapter 3675. Establishing a country. Didn't I come to the Jade Pavilion gathering to obtain the Imperial Teacher's lot? Isn't it just following the requirements of the Confucian cultivators and establishing a country in the name of the Imperial Teacher? Xiao Hua shrugged innocently. Su Tingzi bitterly smiled. Biting words is the specialty of Confucian cultivators. I didn't expect Taoist Xiao to understand this as well. Xiao Hua sternly said, fellow Taoist is correct. I am acting under the rules of Confucian cultivators. I don't have the slightest intention of overstepping my boundaries. The reason I allowed fellow Taoist to stay until now is to give fellow Taoist the leeway to choose. If fellow Taoist doesn't have a choice now, you can return to your cave and think about it. Fellow Taoist helped me with your life, so I will definitely treat fellow Taoist well. Su Tingzi's expression slightly changed when he heard Xiao Hua mention this. Killing a Star Monarch of Star Monarch Hall. Xiao Hua was extremely daring, and Su Tingzi could be considered to be helping the tyrant. If Star Monarch Hall really pursued this matter, he would be heavily punished. Su Tingzi cupped his hands and bid farewell. This matter. I hope Taoist Xiao can give me some time to think about it. Fellow Taoist, please. Seeing Su Tingzi looking at the formation with some fear, Xiao Hua pulled his hand, and the formation was immediately torn apart. Su Tingzi cautiously flew out of the formation and directly flew 300 meters before letting out a sigh of relief. He was the only cultivator who didn't agree to cooperate with Xiao Hua. Moreover, he had seen Xiao Hua kill Star Monarch Hall's Star Monarch Mu Xian. He was truly afraid that Xiao Hua would silence him. After Su Tingzi flew far away, Xiao Hua waved his hand and took back the several dozen jade talismans. He then looked at the pensive Fairy Jing and said, Let's go, Fairy Jing. We're going to the Single Yang Kingdom. At this moment, Fairy Jing was no longer as calm as before. Her misty eyes flickered with a strange expression, as if she was thinking about something or hesitating about something. Hearing Xiao Hua's call, she absent-mindedly nodded and followed him into the air. However, it only took a moment for her to come to her senses. She hastily stopped and waited in the air. She directly flew away, leaving Xiao Hua extremely far behind her. Fairy, what are you thinking about? Xiao Hua chased after her and said with a bitter smile, Why did you leave me behind? It's nothing. Fairy Jing stammered. Wait a moment, fellow Taoist. Speaking of this, Fairy Jing looked apologetic. My mount was originally in Hua, but it was seriously injured in the Jade Pavilion gathering to save me, so I had to ask you to take a flying boat. Soon after, Fairy Jing took out a small flying boat. After Xiao Hua got on, she activated her magic power and flew into the distance. Xiao Hua sat cross-legged on the airship and meditated for half a day with his eyes closed. Seeing Fairy Jing's silent appearance, he smiled and said, Fairy Jing, do you have something you want to ask this Xiao? Sigh. Fairy Jing sighs and turns her head. She looks at Xiao Hua with her beautiful eyes and says in a low voice, This concubine doesn't want to ask. I just find it strange. Fellow Taoist, you have so many nascent soul cultivators by your side, and any two of them you pick are more powerful than me. Wouldn't they be more suitable to escort you than me? Why did fellow Taoist choose this concubine? Xiao Hua smiled and said, It's very simple. It's because you were the first one to notice my serious injuries. Moreover, in order to cover up the news of my injuries, I could only choose you. Fellow Taoist. Fairy Jing slightly shook her head and said in self-mockery, this concubine thinks I can already see through people's hearts. But in front of you, it seems like I'm an idiot. This concubine really doesn't understand what fellow Taoist means. Oh. Hearing this, Xiaohua said in all seriousness, Fairy Jing, although you and I have just met, you were able to save this Xiao. Moreover, in order to cover up my injuries, you walked hand in hand with this Xiao in front of all the cultivators. This Xiao will never forget your actions. Therefore, this Xiao won't hide anything from Fairy Jing. Speaking up to this point, Xiaohua was somewhat tongue-tied. After all, he had already told her that if he hid anything from her, she shouldn't blame him. Seeing Xiaohua's embarrassment, Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled, saying, actually, it's nothing. This concubine already knows that fellow Taoist is using this concubine as a cover to lure others into a trap. This concubine just feels a little uncomfortable. If you had told this concubine earlier, this concubine wouldn't have thought too much about it. Could it be that this concubine would leak it out? Hee, so Fairy Jing already understands. Xiaohua said with a smile, this Xiao still thinks that his actions are flawless. Naturally in the eyes of others, but fellow Taoist didn't hide anything from this concubine. There are many things that even senior Daoran doesn't know about, so this concubine naturally understands. Fairy Jing said with a smile, fellow Taoist, there must be nascent soul cultivators lying in ambush inside your nation treasure. After you and I act as bait to lure those cultivators with ill intentions, fellow Taoist will send them out, right? This? Xiaohua scratched his head and said with a bitter smile, I won't hide it from Fairy Jing. This Xiao's mountain river seal can only contain those cultivators. There are no others. That's impossible. Fairy Jing was a little surprised. She looked around and muttered, there aren't any cultivators following us within a few 100 kilometers. Could it be that this concubine misunderstood fellow Taoist? Xiaohua touched his nose with his hand and thought for a moment, saying, Fairy Jing is right. This Xiao wants to lure people into a trap. Because this person covets this Xiao is very surprised. Because this person has no enmity with this Xiao, and Xiaohua even helped him. However, this Xiao didn't expect that he would want to harm this Xiao. This Xiao wants to know why. In particular, he has seen this Xiao's cultivation and strength. This Xiao really wants to see what his trump card is. Sigh, fellow Taoist is a bit careless. Fairy Jing said worriedly, fellow Taoist's injuries won't heal for several years. This concubine's strength is limited. Xiaohua smiled and waved his hand. It doesn't matter. This is only a guess of this Xiao's, and it might not be true. Moreover, this Xiao feels that that guy isn't so stupid as to really chase after this Xiao. That's good. Fairy Jing smiled sweetly. Now that fellow Taoist said this concubine's heart is still a bit anxious and on edge. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said while looking at the sky, this Xiao originally didn't want to say it, but who asked someone to think so much? Hee. Fairy Jing laughed, as if she hadn't relaxed for a long time. The two of them were silent for a moment, and Fairy Jing asked again. This concubine feels that the happiness of cultivation that fellow Taoist talked about to those nascent soul cultivators is very interesting. It seems to have enlightened this concubine, as if this concubine's previous cultivation had deviated. Xiaohua smiled and said, what if this Xiao says that this is nothing but a lie, a drawing of a pie, or a fantasy? Would Fairy Jing be very disappointed? I would. Fairy Jing's face turned bitter. Actually, this concubine also thought about it before. The Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent are really free and unfettered, and the Buddhist sects of the Western Paradise also cultivate Western Paradise. Even the demons of the thousand-demon sacred realm should be incomparably free. Why is it that our Tao sects are bullied and controlled like this? Is there no paradise that belongs to our Tao sects? There is. But it's not here, nor is it at this time. Xiaohua nodded with certainty. Oh? Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with surprise. Then fellow Taoist Xiao, tell me, where is it? When is it? There will be such a day. there will also be such a place. Xiao Hua made a solemn vow and said, "This Xiao will let you see that the cultivators of my Dao sect can freely fly in the sky. My Dao sects will bloom on the earth. My Dao sect seniors will soar into the sky from time to time. There will be a smooth path of cultivation in front of us. Perhaps at that time, this Xiao will talk about the happiness of cultivation with Fairy Jing. Establishing a sect?" Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with a trace of a smile. "Previously, when I saw fellow Taoist Xiong Yi, and those 20 Jindan disciples call fellow Taoist Xiao Master, this concubine is very fond of you. It feels like a home." Fairy Jing, with your nascent soul middle stage cultivation, you can naturally accept disciples, right? Xiao Hua said with a smile. Fairy Jing wryly smiled and shook her head. "This concubine isn't as ambitious as fellow Taoist. I don't dare to attract the attention of Confucian cultivators." At this point, Fairy Jing suddenly thought of something and asked, "By the way, fellow Taoist Xiao, when Shui Mingzi and Ao Zhantian were here, why didn't you tell them about the alliance between Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong? If you told them, wouldn't they be more confident?" "It's different." Xiao Hua pondered for a moment and said, "These cultivators are fundamentally different from the 200 people that Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong brought. Fellow Taoist, please enlighten me." Fairy Jing didn't understand and said with a smile, "This concubine is confused? To put it bluntly, these cultivators that I brought were deserters from the Jade Pavilion Conference. Although they experienced bloodshed, they didn't experience life and death. They didn't persevere to the end. It can be said that their nature is cowardly. In the future, when there are few storms, perhaps they will choose to run away again." If this Xiao had told them about my alliance with Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong, with their knowledge, they would have immediately understood the size of this force. Perhaps they would have been scared away. Haha, how could that be? Fellow Taoist, you can't bring them out for no reason, right? Fairy Jing looked at Xiao Hua with a smile. Of course. Xiao Hua says with a smile, "Everyone has been forced by this Xiao to pledge their loyalty to me for several hundred to 1,000 years. Otherwise, do you think that this Zhao's happy cultivation would be able to move these old ghosts who have cultivated for several thousand years?" Hee, that's what I said. Fairy Jing was full of smiles. How could they take the bait so easily? That Su Tingzi, fellow Taoist Xiao, has been earnestly persuading fellow Taoist Xiao for so long, and he's still only considering it. Just as they were talking, a divine sense swept over from afar. This divine sense was very hurried and swept over the flying boat as if it was casual, then swept elsewhere. However, it was only a moment before the divine sense swept back and circled around Xiao Hua for a moment before immediately withdrawing. -13. Chapter 3676. Oh, who is this? Xiao Hua's face was a bit astonished. He looked at Fairy Jing blankly and asked in astonishment, "I'm injured, and my spiritual sense is also somewhat damaged. It's hard to tell who it is." Fairy Jing was startled, but she soon understood. She blinked her eyes and said, "This cultivator's cultivation should be at the middle nascent soul stage, but I'm not familiar with his spiritual sense. It's not a fellow Taoist I'm familiar with. It shouldn't be Taoist what either." Oh, Xiao Hua nodded and stood up. He looked into the distance and said with a smile, "Is that the fellow Taoist who came to see me off?" Perhaps. Fairy Jing didn't dare to stop the flying boat. She continued to fly into the distance, but she was secretly on guard. After all, they had been flying for so long, and they had yet to see any nascent soul cultivators. Perhaps Xiao Hua was right about this sudden appearance. Fairy Jing. A moment later, a voice that Fairy Jing wasn't familiar with came from the distance. "Please wait a moment." Fairy Jing slightly tilted her head and thought for a moment. Her expression slightly changed, but soon returned to normal. She said to Xiao Hua, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, it's Taoist Yuanqing." Fairy Jing's eyes flickered with a misty expression. She looked very beautiful. "That's right," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "Since it's an old friend, let's wait a moment." "All right." Fairy Jing looked at Xiao Hua's appearance and could only helplessly nod. She tapped her foot, and the flying boat stopped in midair. After a while, Taoist Yuanqing flew over. His face was slightly flushed and his forehead was unexpectedly sweating. Taoist Xiao, Taoist Yuan Qing called from afar. Why are you flying in this direction? I thought you were going back to Black Wind Mountain. You flew towards Yu province for a long time. Hee. So it's fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. Xiao Hua smiled and cupped his hands. I had some matters to attend to, Liang province, so I didn't directly return to Black Wind Mountain. Hee. Taoist Yuan Qing descended from the sky and glanced at Fairy Jing. I'm afraid you're not really going to Liang province? Are we still going to the seaside? Ha ha ha. Xiao Hua laughed heartily and waved his hand. You're too kind. This one ran into Fairy Jing at the Jade Pavilion banquet. Moreover, Fairy Jing was slightly injured at that time, so this Xiao conveniently brought her out. After asking, I found out that Fairy Jing was heading in the same direction as this Xiao, so this Xiao abruptly asked Fairy Jing to lead the way. That's all. That's all. Taoist Yuan Qing suddenly understood. He looked at Fairy Jing and said with a smile, Fairy Jing, you're really lucky to meet Taoist Xiao again and again. At this point, how could Fairy Jing not know that Xiao Hua was guarding against Taoist Yuan Qing? She also smiled and said, yes, compared to Jinren Jingting, my luck is not just a little bit better. Sigh. Indeed. At the mention of Taoist Master Jingting, Taoist Master Yuan Qing seemed to have found a topic to talk about. He hurriedly continued and sighed. Apart from the difficulty of cultivation, our Taoist cultivators are also far inferior to Confucian cultivators in terms of luck. Taoist Master Jingting. I'm afraid he's a very extreme example. Although he wanted to serve Taoist Xiao in the end, he still died. At this time, Taoist Master Jingting's nascent soul was naturally already in Xiao Hua's mountain river seal. With the mother-child spirit fruit, he should be able to cultivate a scattered nascent soul like Hong Songzi. Although he couldn't compare to Xiao Hua and the others, he was still alive after all, which was a lot better than dying. What Xiao Hua was currently thinking about was how to use the Immortal Slaying Platform or the 5 Qis Righteous Thunder to refine the 2 nascent souls, and even the 100 or so nascent souls that were about to be repaired. Of course, he wouldn't mention this to Taoist Yuan Qing and the others. Therefore, Xiao Hua asked with a smile, that's right, Taoist Yuan Qing chased me all the way here. Is there something you need from this Xiao? Taoist Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, how could there be anything? It's just that this one received a lot of help from Taoist at the Yaodai conference. Moreover, this one already said before entering the Yaodai mountain that this one wanted to ask Taoist for advice on cultivation. Who would have thought that there was no time before the Yaodai conference, and this time, the Yaodai conference was a mess. As soon as this one left the Yaodai mountain, Taoist disappeared. Hastily, Hai Hongzi and I split up to look for Taoist. Oh, later on, Hai Hongzi encountered a lot of calamities in the Yaodai mountain's great formation. In his heart, he regretted not following Taoist. He even wanted to apologize to Taoist. Hee, it's fine, it's fine. Xiao Hua said with a smile, it's all in the past. Don't mention it. In the face of benefits and danger, no matter if it's a cultivator or a mortal, they all have a selfish side. This one can't avoid this custom, and there's no harm in imposing it on others. Alas, unfortunately, fellow Taoist Hong Songzi's luck was not good. In the end, he still fell in the Great Formation. Taoist Yuan Qing sighed and said, fortunately, his nascent soul was protected by the Star Lord Palace's Great Formation. I don't know what kind of opportunity he had. Opportunity? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and asked very strangely, fellow Taoist Yuan Qing said. Those fellow Taoists whose bodies were destroyed, their nascent souls weren't destroyed by the Great Formation. Could it be that they had other opportunities? Taoist Yuan Qing smiled bitterly and shook his head. I don't know about this. However, since those nascent souls weren't killed by the Great Formation at that time, they probably wouldn't be killed later on. I only guess that they might be protected by the Star Lord Palace. Alas, even if they can protect them, what can they do without their bodies? Xiao Hua glanced at Fairy Jing, but her expression didn't change. It seemed that she wasn't looking for Renjing for her nascent soul. Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. Taoist Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, I'll send a messaging talisman to Hai Hongzi. Fairy Jing, let's keep going. I'll take the opportunity to ask you some questions about cultivation. Fairy Jing looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua smiled and said, let's listen to fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. If Hai Hongzi doesn't come, we'll take fellow Taoist Yuan Qing to the seaside. Hee, very good, very good. Taoist Yuan Qing sent the messaging talisman and asked Xiaohua to sit down. He also sat down. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly thought of something and said curiously, oh, Fairy Jing, aren't you injured? How can I trouble you to drive the boat? Why don't you be my spiritual shuttle? Oh, since Taoist Xiao and Taoist Yuan Qing are here, I'll naturally drive the boat. Fairy Jing covered it up casually. Both of you have profound cultivation and are discussing the Tao. I can learn a thing or two from you. All right. Taoist Yuan Qing smiled and ignored Fairy Jing. He opened his mouth to ask Xiaohua for advice. Xiaohua didn't stand on ceremony. As long as Taoist Yuan Qing asked a question, he would answer it from the simple to the profound. He didn't hide anything and even drew inferences about other problems. Whether it was the essence of Confucian cultivation or Buddhist scriptures, he could always explain it well. Not only did Taoist Yuan Qing scratch his ears and cheeks, but even Fairy Jing's face blushed as if she couldn't control her joy. For more than 3 days, Xiaohua didn't stop talking. He talked about the essence of cultivation in the middle nascent soul stage. It was like a deluge of heavenly flowers. Occasionally, Fairy Jing would come to realize that Xiaohua wasn't talking to Taoist Yuan Qing at all. He was clearly talking to her. Joy and disappointment appeared in her watery eyes, but she immediately focused and didn't dare to delay. In her 1,000 years of cultivation, she had never been as happy as listening to lectures for 3 days. Taoist Yuan Qing's eyes flashed across the abyss as he pondered. Suddenly, a hint of panic flashed through his eyes. In this panic, there seemed to be reluctance, choice, and hesitation. But soon, Taoist Yuan Qing's eyes became clear again. He stood up with a smile and bowed. Taoist Xiao, this junior really admires Taoist Yuan Qing's cultivation. The teachings I've received in these 3 days are worth 300 years of cultivation. This junior really didn't expect Taoist Yuan Qing to be so well-versed in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Moreover, you've cleverly combined the teachings of these 3 sections. Although this junior doesn't know what level Taoist Yuan Qing's cultivation has reached, the teachings you've given me in these 3 days have answered all of my questions. This junior is very regretful. If this junior had met senior 100 years earlier, no, 10 years earlier, this junior wouldn't have had such a difficult time. Of course, even so, this junior is confident that I can reach the late nascent soul stage after receiving senior's teachings. This junior must thank Taoist Xiao. Oh, why are you being so polite? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and said in astonishment, fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, please take a seat. This place is still far from where we're going. Let me have a good chat with fellow Taoist Yuan Qing. This junior really wants to ask for some advice from Taoist Xiao. Unfortunately, as Taoist Yuan Qing spoke, his figure turned into a streak of light and immediately fled from the flying boat. His voice, however, remained. Taoist Xiao, your path has come to an end. Oh, Xiaohua didn't find it strange at all. He said regretfully, fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, you've finally revealed your true face? This Xiao is still looking forward to your repentance. Huh? Taoist Yuan Qing saw that not only was Xiaohua not nervous, he even spoke in such a manner as if he had seen through everything. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He hurriedly said, how did you know? As he spoke, boom, 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 3 enormous rumbling sounds rushed out from the clouds of the heavenly moat. Caw. After one of the rumbling sounds, a sharp eagle cry suddenly rang out. A pair of wings that were over 30 meters in size stirred up a strong wind. A tall, red-faced cultivator rushed out from the abyss while standing on Heaven Shaking Tsong. Heaven Shaking Tsong's eyes were like lightning, his eagle claws were like hooks, and his entire body's navy blue feathers were dotted with red spots. Roar! Heaven Shaking Tsong rushed out in front of Xiaohua's head. Another bestial roar that sounded like a great bell came from behind Xiaohua. A short cultivator wearing tight clothes rode a scarlet leopard that was several meters in size out of the fog. Not only was the leopard's entire body scarlet red, even its eyes were abnormally red. Fire lotuses faintly flickered on its 4 hooves as it stepped on the air. -13. Chapter 3677. Looking at Xiao Hua's left hand, there was a waterfall hanging upside down in the air. Standing above the waterfall was Hai Hongzi, whom Xiao Hua had met before. Hehe, sure enough, I've attracted all of you here. Xiao Hua sneered. This saves me the trouble of looking elsewhere. Xiao Hua. Taoist Yuan Qing was very puzzled. You? How did you know? You, when did you find out? Do you think you're being very secretive? Xiao Hua sneered. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence that you met me? There are thousands of people participating in the Jade Pavilion meeting. How did you meet me all of a sudden? Hearing this, Taoist Yuan Qing sneered. Humph. I was going to welcome Hong Songzi at that time, but I didn't expect you to be there. Didn't I take advantage of the situation? Isn't what you're saying a bit too far-fetched? Then, in the first formation, you clearly knew that Daoist Xiangtian was related to Fairy Xiangfeng. So why did you let your two-headed snake fight with Daoist Xiangtian? You were so anxious to provoke a fight. Didn't you want me to meet Daoist Xiangtian face-to-face? Do you think I'm an idiot? Xiao Hua laughed. Taoist Yuan Qing nodded. You're right, this was my mistake. I was a bit impatient, but you can rest assured that Daoist Xiangtian's death, I've already found someone to tell Fairy Xiangfeng about it. I'll take your head to Fairy Xiangfeng. You're really a troublemaker. Xiao Hua sighed. Before the Jade Pavilion meeting, I was still worried about Fairy Xiangfeng's revenge, but now I don't care. Do you think you can escape from the 4 of us? Hai Hongzi sneered. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua ignored Hai Hongzi and said to Taoist Yuan Qing, also, when you snatched the jade box in the formation, you didn't snatch it yourself, but called my name and asked me to do it. Isn't this the trick that Fairy Jing used to call Taoist Jingting's name? I've done this kind of thing before. How could I not know? It was at that time that I became suspicious of you. Taoist Yuan Qing's face darkened. Actually, now that I think about it, you pulled me, Hong Songzi, and Hai Hongzi to participate in the Yaodai gathering together before the Yaodai gathering. At that time, Hai Hongzi had already said that he and you had already practiced the joint attack of the 3 of you, so there was no need to pull me along. This itself was also a flaw. I don't think Hai Hongzi knew about your plan at that time, right? Also, I beat you at your own game twice. One time, I killed Jing Mubai, and the other time, I killed Soaring Heaven. You didn't help me even once, right? You said that you wanted to join hands with me, but you didn't even try to help me. You even let Reverend Xiangtian stab me in the heart with a flying sword in front of you. This really makes me feel disappointed. Killed Jing Mubao? Hai Hongzi was shocked. The other 2 cultivators also had strange expressions on their faces. Haha, Xiao Hua, what's the use of saying this now? Immortal Yuan Qing could not allow Xiao Hua to continue speaking. He laughed out loud and said, even if you have the ability to kill a Star Lord, you were seriously injured at the Yaodai banquet. Lying in the red clouds, you did not even have the slightest feeling. How could you possibly be a match for us now? Don't tell me that it wasn't Fairy Jing who brought you out of the Yaodai gathering. Don't tell me that it was Fairy Jing who used her magic power all the way, and you didn't use any magic power at all. Don't tell me that your cultivation was destroyed. Don't tell me that you didn't go back to the Black Cloud Ridge and went somewhere else. Don't tell me that you were afraid that others would kill you on the way. As he spoke, he looked at Fairy Jing's expression and smiled. Fairy Jing, this old man doesn't know how you were bewitched. When you saw the dying Xiao Hua, you didn't even care about your own life to save him. If you didn't make that choice back then, you wouldn't have died today. Ah. Fairy Jing raised her eyebrows and said in surprise, What? You were there that day? Yes, he was half a step earlier than you. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Unfortunately, he was frightened by my plan to beat you at your own game. He thought it was my plan this time, so he didn't dare to make a move. When he wanted to make a move, you came. But when he wanted to make a move on you, the formation was broken. So he had no choice but to endure until now. You, how do you know everything? Taoist Yuan Qing looked as if he had seen a ghost, his face pale. Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. There are still many things I don't know. I don't know why you want to kill me. I also don't know why I've told you so much in these 3 days. You clearly know that my cultivation is far above yours, but you still want to kill me. Fellow Taoists. Taoist Yuan Qing didn't answer Xiao Hua. Instead, he turned to Hai Hongzi and the other two and said, now that things have come to this, there's no need to retreat. Xiao Hua killed Star Monarch Jing Mushuan of Star Monarch Palace. He won't let this news leak out. Regardless of whether he still has magic power or not, he won't let us live. Moreover, fellow Taoists, don't worry. I did see Xiao Hua faint earlier. He was brought out of Jade Mountain by Li Jing. He doesn't have the magic power to fly. Moreover, in these 3 days, I didn't see him use any true essence. His nascent soul is long gone. When Hai Hongzi and the others heard this, their expressions became calm. At this time, Taoist Yuan Qing said to Xiao Hua, as for why I want to kill you, you can rest assured. I'm not an idiot. I definitely won't tell you. However, I can tell you that even if you preach in front of this old man for 3 days, this old man will still kill you. Because as long as we kill you, the 4 of us will no longer be restricted by Confucian cultivators. We can live freely in hidden, immortal continent. Arrogant people like you don't know how powerful the Confucian cultivators on hidden, immortal continent are. Only death awaits you if you go against them. Enlistment. Enlistment by Confucian cultivators? Xiao Hua said coldly, henceforth, you'll become a lackey of Confucian cultivators. They don't need to care about you and let you live or die. But do you really have your own freedom? Whether I have freedom or not, this old man doesn't know now. This old man only knows that your head is the proof of our allegiance. Taoist Yuan Qing's face was somewhat ferocious. In fact, long before this old man stepped on the flying boat, this old man had some plans to persuade you to join the Confucian cultivators. But after listening to your speech, this old man immediately gave up this idea. With you in front, this proof of our allegiance, isn't it more important than others? Moreover, this old man also understood why those Confucian cultivators wanted to kill you. You're the second Grand Mist ancestor. Who are those Confucian cultivators? Xiao Hua asked. Haha. Taoist Yuan Qing laughed loudly and pointed his hand. Taoist Xiao, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? Taoist Yuan Qing, don't take out this kind of inferior trick and make a fool of yourself. Taoist Yuan Qing, you're still thinking about how to get out of trouble and how to escape from our attacks, right? Alas. Xiao Hua sighed and glanced at the rather nervous Fairy Jing. He shook his head and said, our Tao sect's disciples were originally weak in the hidden, immortal continent. The Jade Pavilion gathering even drew out the greedy Tao sect's disciples from their seclusion. 60% of them were killed in Star-Lord Hall's net. Well, it could be said that less than 70% of them survived. This old man felt very pained and felt that he had the heart but was powerless. But look at you guys. For the sake of enlistment by Confucian cultivators, you actually abandoned your own principles and offered your savior to them as proof of your allegiance. With your actions, even if you can enter the Taoist path, so what? Even if you listen to this old man's lecture for 100 days, so what? After saying this, Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at Cang Zhentian, whose wings covered the sky. His expression was rather desolate. In order to kill this old man, you really put in a lot of effort. Is this Cang Zhentian specifically going to deal with this old man's spirit-seeking mouse? Where's your 2-headed monster, Sihong? Are you afraid to take it out? Afraid that my spirit-seeking mouse will dig out its heart? Xiao Hua then looked at the scarlet rainbow leopard and sneered. And this beast, presumably it's going to deal with Fairy Jing's demonic beast, Inghua, right? And you 4 beasts, if you think you can bully Fairy Jing, then you can deal with this old man, who lost all his Taoist techniques because he saved Taoist disciples on Jade Mountain, right? It's useless to say more. The tall cultivator standing on top of Cang Zhentian said coldly, this old man doesn't know who you are, nor what you did in the past. This old man only knows that with your head, this old man will be able to properly cultivate. I won't be afraid of being remembered or hunted down by Confucian cultivators. Since you call yourself a senior and have such a broad heart, why don't you give your head to this old man? How about helping this old man? If you want to take Taoist Master Zhao's life, you'll have to step over my corpse first. Fairy Jing sneered and waved her sleeve. Gigi. Several sounds that were unwilling to be left out flew out from her sleeve. The demonic beast, Inghua, swayed its big ears, and a bewitching light flew out from its eyes. Xiaohua was slightly taken aback because Inghua seemed to be in good spirits and didn't seem to have any serious injuries. It was far from what Fairy Jing had said earlier. Xiaohua looked at Fairy Jing with some doubt. At this moment, Fairy Jing had already walked in front of Xiaohua and blocked him with her figure that couldn't be considered weak. Hee. Sure enough, you two are in love. Taoist Master Xiao, you have such good luck with women. Another cultivator standing on a rainbow leopard opened his mouth and laughed loudly. His eyes flashed with a dirty look. Participating in the Jade Pavilion gathering and being able to obtain the heart of a nascent soul female cultivator is more precious than any treasure. But rest assured, Taoist Master Xiao, your luck with women. This old man will enjoy it for you in the future. Xiaohua didn't pay attention to that cultivator's gaze. He looked at Taoist Master Yuanqing and nodded. For this ambush, you've really put in a lot of effort. Not only did you find Song Zhantian, who naturally restrains seeking spirit mice, you even found a demonic beast that Inghua is afraid of. AI, to be honest, to be able to arrange all this in such a short time, you're definitely a genius. Killing you is truly a pity. -13. Chapter 3678. Taoist Master Yuanqing wasn't moved by Xiaohua's words and coldly said, "This old man didn't arrange it. It's just that your luck is too bad, and it's also because Confucian cultivators are too powerful. No matter what you say now, it's useless. This old man has already observed that no cultivators have passed through the surrounding 50 kilometers in the past 3 days. Don't even think that a cultivator will come and save you." Haha, that's the biggest joke in the world. This is the first time I've heard someone say that my luck is bad. Xiaohua laughed heartily as he looked at Fairy Jing's rabbit-like demon beast. Although it looked very fierce, it actually cowered under the gemstone-red gaze of the rainbow leopard expert in the distance, and its body trembled from time to time. Thus, he said to Fairy Jing, who was standing in front of him, "Fairy Jing, put away your bewilderment. We don't need it to deal with these beasts." "No." Fairy Jing refused without hesitation and patted her Qinkuan bag. It was the jade pendant that Xiaohua had seen before. As soon as the jade pendant rushed out of the space, it immediately emitted a tenacious brilliance that protected Fairy Jing and Xiaohua. Fairy Jing then opened her mouth and spat out a magic treasure that looked like a shell. The shell emitted a tricolored brilliance and slowly expanded. A fierce, desolate, and even fishy aura emanated from the shell. Fairy Jing's face was cautious, as if she really didn't care about her own life. There was a rare stern look in her eyes that was like smoke and ripples. "Many thanks, Fairy Jing." Xiaohua sighed and whispered behind her, "It's good that Fairy Jing is so considerate. As for taking action, that's my business." After saying that, an auspicious cloud appeared under Xiaohua's feet and carried him into the sky. Xiaohua waved his hand, and Little Silver flew out of the space. Sure enough, as soon as Little Silver, who had always been obedient, flew out, sky-shaking heavens raised its head and screamed. Its wings flapped as if it wanted to rush over. Little Silver shrunk its neck and immediately flew into Xiaohua's hand. It hid its small mouse face behind Xiaohua's thumb, revealing only half of its mouse eyes. Who knew if it was really afraid or just faking it? Xiaohua completely ignored Little Silver's show-off. With a flick of his middle finger, he motioned for Little Silver to fly towards the rainbow leopard. He then waved his other hand, and a black shadow mixed with golden light flew out of his hand. It was none other than the divine power centipede which had appeared on a demon cloud. Taoist Yuanqing was a little stupefied. He indeed didn't expect Xiaohua to have 2 demon beasts, but when he saw the divine power centipede, he sneered and waved his hand. "Fellow Taoists, success or failure. As long as we kill him, his demon beasts, and the treasures in his Qinkuan bag from the jades in his Qinkuan bags. This old man doesn't want these things. This old man only wants Xiaohua's head. Kill." Since Taoist Yuanqing had given the order, Hai Hongzi and the other 2 didn't waste time. They each rode their demon beasts and urged their magic power to attack Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing from all sides. Heh. Xiao Hua sneered. Chirp chirp. When the divine power centipede heard this, it immediately unleashed its might. With a hiss, strange runes surged around its body. Then, with a burst of demon chi, it grew to several feet long and pounced at Sky, shaking heaven's abdomen. Little Silver, who had been flying slowly in the air, suddenly sped up. There was even a rumbling sound in the air, but it was only for a moment before a silver curve, almost invisible to the naked eye, pounced at the rainbow leopard's back. Roar! Sky, shaking heavens, roared. Roar! The rainbow leopard also roared. The two demon beasts jumped up together and took the initiative to fly out from under the two nascent soul cultivators. Their eyes flashed with a flirtatious light. They were clearly very excited and cared a lot about their opponents. Woo-woo! While the demonic beasts were fighting, Taoist Master Yuan Qing's halberd let out a wave-like cry. Hai Hongzi's magic weapon that was like a waterfall let out a mighty roar that was even more powerful than Fairy Jing's shell magic weapon. The two nascent soul cultivators activated their divine thoughts, and the transcendence energy around their bodies transformed into two huge hands, grabbing towards Xiao Hua. Ha ha ha. Xiao Hua laughed and shook his head slightly. If I kill you all, it'll really be bullying you. It'll be an unfair victory. As he spoke, sword chi flashed around Xiao Hua's body. Thousands of sword lights suddenly burst out from Xiao Hua's body. Then, Xiao Hua opened his mouth and 4 flying swords of different colors rushed out. The thousands of sword lights surged with sword chi and turned into 4 giant swords that flew towards the 4 cultivators. The sword chi was imposing, the sword light was cold, and an austere aura sealed off the entire area. You're a Confucian cultivator? Taoist Yuan Qing was shocked, and his face turned ashen. After all, the position of Xiao Hua's sword was enough to block one of Ming Hao's halberd's attacks. Without Fairy Jing's help, Xiao Hua would still be undefeated in a 1 versus 4 battle. Xiao Hua sneered. You think I'm all talk and no action? After listening to me for 3 days, I'm afraid that you're only thinking about how to kill me, right? Impossible. You're proficient in Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Taoist Yuan Qing didn't dare to believe it. At this moment, 4 loud sounds rang out as the flying swords struck Ming Hao's halberd. Ming Hao's halberd, which hadn't been damaged even during the Jade Pavilion conference, was instantly pushed back several meters by Xiao Hua's flying swords. A deep crack appeared on it, and it looked like it was about to break. With Ming Hao's halberd in such a state, Hai Hongzi's magic weapon was even worse. With a loud bang, the sword light was split in half, and Hai Hongzi's figure flew back several meters, his face dark red. The other 2 cultivators were even more miserable. Not only were their nascent soul's hands shattered, but their left and right arms were also shattered by the sword light. Their faces flashed with astonishment, as if they had never seen such tyrannical sword chi before. Let's go. Taoist Yuan Qing was indeed an ambitious and ruthless person. Seeing that Xiao Hua was unstoppable, he immediately made a decision. We don't need to tangle with him. As long as we pass the news of him attacking Star-Lord Palace's Star-Lord Well to Mount Yaodai, Senior Kong Hongwu will naturally personally take his dog head. Oh. At this moment, the arrogant rainbow leopard let out a miserable roar, leaving behind its last sound in this world. Then, its body fell from the sky. That cute little Silver swung its body and carefully used its little paws to wash its face in the air. It was unknown whether it was because of mysophobia or because it was shy. Hiss! The thin and small cultivator sucked in a breath of cold air. He didn't know that he was even more shocked that his arm was injured by Xiao Hua, but before he could urge his body to fly back, an extremely heavy hissing sound came from afar. The demonic cloud in the sky suddenly flourished, and then a bloody light suddenly appeared. The sky shaking heavens was actually split in half from head to toe by a black light. Taoist Yuan Qing was scared silly. He had really calculated for a long time and thought of many possibilities, but he still neglected to consider that Xiao Hua actually had the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator. Even if his dantian was shattered and his nascent soul was destroyed, he still couldn't be Xiaohua's opponent. This so-called demonic beast divine power centipede was even more unexpected, and he didn't even consider it. After all, it was already good for a Taoist cultivator to have a demonic beast as a companion. How could they raise a second demonic beast? Go, go, go. This was Taoist Yuanqing's only thought at this time. Trembling with fear, he didn't dare to stay any longer. Unfortunately, this simple thought couldn't be realized now. Just when the four nascent soul cultivators wanted to urge their magic power to escape, they suddenly felt an incomparably powerful force confining them. Oh, it couldn't be said to be confinement, because there wasn't the slightest bit of magic power fluctuation. It was a kind of pure power. Taoist Yuanqing turned pale with fright. He hurriedly rubbed his hands, and several rays of light suddenly appeared in the void. The light around Taoist Yuanqing violently trembled, and cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared in midair. The hand of a nascent soul? When Hai Hongzi saw this, a familiar feeling spontaneously arose, and he couldn't help but involuntarily cry out, "You, how can your divine sense, how can it be so strong?" Another nascent soul cultivator was so scared that he trembled slightly and said in a low voice, Are you a nascent soul cultivator? Go to hell." Xiaohua didn't answer, and indifferently opened his mouth, like a god in the sky. The actions of these four people were no different from bandits. What was special was that they had superhuman divine abilities. If they were left in the world, they would only be able to kill more Taoist cultivators. Following Xiaohua's words, the four divine senses were like hammers, rushing down, and a rumbling sound rang out in the air. See, falling stone array. Fairy Jing had already put away her magic treasure, and when she heard the familiar whistling sound, she couldn't help but think of the huge, falling stone that made her tremble with fear. Facing this divine sense hammer that was comparable to falling stars, the four nascent soul cultivators' faces were ashen. They finally understood why Xiaohua wasn't afraid of them. With such a strong divine sense, even if he didn't have a dantian, then, so what? Fight! Taoist Yuanqing let out a heart-wrenching roar, and just as he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood essence, a withered green wooden vine flew out. Boom! Light flashed around Taoist Yuanqing's body, and the strong impact instantly tore his body into pieces. A 6-foot-long nascent soul flashed inside his body, and its figure slightly drifted, as if it was about to teleport. Unfortunately, when Xiaohua stretched out his hand, the space around the nascent soul was like iron, and the nascent soul couldn't disappear after squeezing for a moment. Xiaohua waved his hand, and the nascent soul immediately fell into his hand. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to stretch out his left index finger, and a faint crystal thread entered the space between the nascent soul's eyebrows. After a moment, several dark green lights flashed between Xiaohua's eyebrows, and strands of ghost-like light once again fell between the nascent soul's eyebrows. After that, there was nothing after that. Facing a cultivator like Xiaohua, who was able to kill a cultivator of the upper 5th level of essence energy, how could 3 nascent soul cultivators of the middle 4th level of essence energy be his opponent? The bodies of the 3 cultivators were shattered by the divine sense hammer, and after Xiaohua searched their souls, the 3 nascent souls were stored in the mountain river seal. In the future, even if they came out, they could only wear the Taoist robes of the green-robed Xiaohua. A painstakingly planned ambush was only a wedding dress for someone else. -13. Chapter 3679. Seeing Xiaohua deal with 4 cultivators who were more powerful than her so easily, Fairy Jing had an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was as if she had been cheated, but also as if she was relaxed. She even felt that it was only natural. As for Xiaohua's method of dealing with the 4 nascent soul cultivators, Fairy Jing didn't think much of it. She knew that if she and Xiaohua had fallen into their hands, it would have been even worse. However, she was still a little curious. She didn't understand why he had to keep the 4 nascent soul cultivators alive. Of course, she wouldn't ask too much. She landed on the flying boat with a smile in her eyes. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still need me to steer the boat for you?" "Hee hee, of course not." Xiaohua laughed and waved his hand, and the Pegasus pulled the flying carriage out. Fairy Jing's eyes lit up at the sight of such an arrogant Pegasus, and she smiled. Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed very resourceful. This kind of light feather unicorn is very rare in the world. Oh, this is called a light feather unicorn? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows. I thought it was a Pegasus. Although Pegasuses also have light feathers, they don't have a horn. Fairy Jing landed on the flying carriage with a smile. Moreover, Pegasuses are most particular about the purity of their bloodline. The Immortal Palace would never let their Pegasuses. At this point, Fairy Jing stopped talking. She looked at the light feather heavenly horse with some envy and said, Actually, it's this kind of demonic beast with an impure bloodline that has the potential to develop. It can have unexpected abilities. Xiaohua also landed on the flying carriage. He patted the Pegasus with his hand and put little silver on its back. He put away the divine power centipede and said, I didn't expect Fairy Jing to know so much about demon beasts. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. Didn't I tell you before? I established my country by the sea, and there are often demons of the 1,000 demons sacred realm who come to trade. It would be strange if I didn't know about this. That's right. Hearing this, Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something. He extended his hand and said, Fairy Jing, if possible, please give your magic treasure to me. I'll find some time to refine it for you. If it has the power of a spirit treasure, consider it my apology for deceiving you. When Fairy Jing heard this, her face turned red, and her eyes flickered. She bit her lips and said in a low voice, Fellow Taoist Xiao, I appreciate your kindness. It's just that my magic treasure is different from others. I can only refine it myself, and no one else can help me. Oh, there's such a strange thing? Xiaohua was stunned and wanted to ask more, but seeing Fairy Jing's awkward expression, he knew that her magic treasure was a bit strange, so he didn't ask any more questions. He scratched his head and said, This is troublesome. This Xiao has to do something to feel at ease. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and said, If fellow Taoist Xiao has the heart, just like what you said a few days ago, explaining cultivation to me again, I would be very grateful. Good. Xiaohua said with a smile. This Xiao likes this kind of business that only talks and doesn't make a loss. Fairy Jing, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. This Xiao can help you resolve them. Fairy Jing was stunned by this question. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. After all, what Xiaohua said in 3 days was enough for her to comprehend for many years. Even someone as strong as Taoist Yuanqing praised that 3 days was equivalent to 300 years of bitter cultivation. Although this was a bit exaggerated, it also showed that what Xiaohua said was indeed profound. Fairy Jing had already heard a lot. If she couldn't comprehend it herself, what was the point of asking more? All right, Xiaohua blinked and said, Then let's chat casually. There's no need to worry about any cultivation method. Actually, fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't pursue the matter, Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with a strange light. She said, I have a little secret that I don't want others to know. It doesn't matter. Xiaohua waved his hand. It's nothing. Every cultivator has their own privacy. I won't let you know about my privacy. My privacy is also nothing. Fairy Jing thought for a moment and asked in a low voice, I wonder what fellow Taoist thinks about the monsters of the 1,000 monsters sacred realm? Monsters? Xiaohua was stunned. He thought for a moment and smiled. Monsters are monsters and humans are humans. Monsters don't seem to be lower than humans and humans aren't nobler than monsters. That's all. That's right. Fellow Taoist is right. Fairy Jing bit her pale lips and nodded. It's something that can't be compared. Why force yourself to compare? That day, I saw you make a deal with Ingpur of the 1,000 monsters sacred realm. Although other people have something to ask of monsters, there was disdain on their faces when they made the deal. On the other hand, fellow Taoist Zhao's smile was so sincere that I rarely saw it. So, I really feel that, in the eyes of fellow Taoist, monsters and humans are equal. Fairy Jing, you're making me embarrassed. Xiaohua scratched his head. But we both have our own needs. I've never thought of such a high level. Speaking of this, Xiaohua blinked. He seemed to have thought of something, and a strange light appeared in his eyes. Sure enough, Fairy Jing blushed and said shyly, "Fellow Taoist, Xiao must have already guessed that my bloodline isn't pure. I have monster blood flowing in my veins." "Is that so?" Xiao Hua smiled. "What's so strange about that? Do you think I'm a Confucian Taoist?" Hee hee. Seeing that Xiao Hua acted as if he hadn't heard her, Fairy Jing relaxed and said, "That heart shell is a magic treasure that I was born with. The secrets inside can only be discovered by me. Others can't help me. That's good." Xiao Hua nodded. "If possible, could you let me take a closer look at that heart shell?" When Fairy Jing heard this, a trace of shyness appeared on her face. Seeing this, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand. Forget it. Just pretend I didn't say anything." "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please wait a moment." Seeing Xiao Hua waving his hand, Fairy Jing was a bit worried. She hurriedly opened her mouth, and a three-colored brilliance rushed out from her mouth. The fist-sized heart shell flew out and landed on Fairy Jing's hand. Fairy Jing handed the heart shell to Xiao Hua without hesitation and lowered her head. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, please take a look." Looking at how Fairy Jing's ears were burning and how she didn't dare to look him in the eye, how could Xiao Hua not know that he was being rude? However, although he did not take the heart shell, he still looked at it carefully. He saw that this heart shell was like a real shell, with lines engraved on it. Between the lines, there were extremely small runes buried within. The runes were a little strange, but Xiao Hua found them familiar. Weren't they the runes on the bones of the two demonic beasts from before? However, Xiao Hua's gaze was fixed on the three-colored light of the heart shell, as he was familiar with these three colors. Taoist magic treasures and spells were mostly bright, and three-colored lights were not uncommon. However, the three colors of Fairy Jing's heart shell were different from the other three colors. They were bright and lively, just like a person's eyes. These three colors were very similar to the seven-colored conch's brilliance Xiao Hua obtained in the Sui He seabed formation. Moreover, Xiao Hua saw that these three colors were three of the seven colors of the conch, and they were very similar to the size of the light. Thump, thump. Just as Xiao Hua was concentrating on examining the heart shell suddenly trembled like a human's ear. Xiao Hua's eyelashes also moved along with the trembling. He no longer dared to look closely and hurriedly withdrew his gaze. He smiled and said, "Fairy, this heart shell is really beautiful." And Fairy Jing responded in a low voice and quickly withdrew her hand. The heart shell strangely disappeared, and even Xiao Hua didn't see how she put it away. After a while, Fairy Jing's expression returned to normal, and she said in a low voice, "Didn't fellow Taoist Xiao ask me how to use the Ranjing from Yaodai Mountain? Actually, I want to use it on this heart shell." "Oh, I understand." Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and asked, "Then, is it true that the older it is, the more useful it is for Fairy Jing?" "Of course." Fairy Jing answered without hesitation. Fairy Jing immediately cried out in alarm because Xiao Hua waved his hand and a dazzling golden Ranjing immediately appeared in front of her eyes. Xiao Hua said very calmly, "I have occasionally obtained Ranjing in the past, but I didn't know what it was, so I kept it. Only today at the Jade Pavilion gathering did I know the origin of this item. I'm afraid I won't be able to use it. How about exchanging it for Fairy Jing's Ranjing?" "Okay." Fairy Jing smiled like a flower and didn't act polite with Xiao Hua. She took Xiao Hua's Ranjing and gave her Ranjing to Xiao Hua, which was not only pitifully small, but also had a very different luster. She then said, "Many thanks, fellow Taoist. If I succeed in my cultivation in the future, it will be fellow Taoist's credit. Your own cultivation has nothing to do with me." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said with a smile, "By the way, if fellow Taoist needs my help, feel free to tell me. My cultivation isn't high, but I have some disciples under me, and some of them can travel in the Thousand Demons sacred realm." Fairy Jing returned the favor and asked. Xiao Hua muttered to himself, and with a wave of his hand, he took out a jade eye and placed it on his forehead. After a moment, he handed it to Fairy Jing and said, "I don't know if Fairy Jing has seen this before, or if you know what it is." Fairy Jing took the jade eye and looked at it. A look of disbelief appeared in her eyes, but after a moment, she murmured, "That's not possible. That's not possible." Xiao Hua's heart moved, and he stared at Fairy Jing, waiting for her reply. Unexpectedly, Fairy Jing raised her head and said, "This thing? I haven't seen or heard of it before. However, I'll help fellow Taoists look for it. If I have any news, I'll send a message to Senior Taoist and ask Senior Taoist to pass it on to fellow Taoist." "Okay," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I'll have to trouble Fairy Jing. However, if Fairy Jing has any news, it's better to directly send it to me. There's no need to let Zhang Taoist know." -13. Chapter 3680. Haha. When Fairy Jing heard this, she didn't say anything. She hesitated for a moment before asking in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I have a secret. I want to ask. I don't know if I should say it." If it were anyone else, Xiao Hua would definitely reply, "Since you don't know if you should say it, then don't say it." But when he saw Fairy Jing's slightly red face, Xiao Hua seemed to think of something and faintly smiled. "Fairy, if you have something to say, then say it. I'll tell you everything I know." "Fellow Taoist Xiao." Fairy Jing bit her lips and looked outside the flying carriage. Her voice was lower than a mosquito's. "I wonder which fellow Taoist has the fortune to be your dual cultivation partner?" This, Xiaohua wasn't surprised. He was just hesitating on how to explain it to Fairy Jing. After thinking for a moment, he faintly looked at the clouds below the flying carriage and sorrowfully said, "I'll tell Fairy a story." Then, Xiaohua slightly concealed the matter between him and Xue Xue. Xue Xue's feelings were so deep that even Fairy Jing's heart trembled. Her face paled and her rippling eyes were filled with envy. Although she left, she already remained in his heart. Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish, Fairy Jing took a deep breath and waved her hand. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's no need to say it. This is what it means to be a pair of lovebirds in the heavens and a branch on earth. Yin and Yang are connected through the heart, and the bridge of helplessness is stronger than metal." "I understand." After saying this, Fairy Jing closed her eyes and seemed to be meditating. Xiaohua sighed in his heart and also closed his eyes to comprehend the powerful divine sense technique. In the silence, the Pegasus had already flown far away. The scenery below the flying carriage changed and many cultivators passed by. Xiaohua had already changed his Taoist robes and looked like a scholar. Moreover, there was an early nascent soul stage female cultivator on the flying carriage, so no one dared to cause trouble. Seeing the sky turn dark and the Pegasus' brilliance illuminated half the sky, Fairy Jing opened her eyes and seemed to be in a good mood. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Fellow Taoist, this light feather heavenly beast is truly amazing. If it was in the hands of others, it would be a disaster." "That's right. When this Zhao's cultivation was still low, I didn't even dare to use it." Xiaohua took the opportunity to sigh and said, "After all, human nature is hard to fathom. Regardless of whether it's a Taoist cultivator or a Confucian cultivator, it's hard to avoid greed when they see this item." "Oh, by the way, why did Taoist Yuanqing want to kill you?" Fairy Jing didn't seem to want to ask this question at first, but after showing the shell to Xiaohua, their relationship seemed to have gotten closer. Then, after hearing Xiaohua's story, their relationship seemed to have gotten even closer. As they chatted, Fairy Jing inadvertently brought it up. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Actually, it's very simple. I'm on the profound yellow rankings." "Haha, I see." Fairy Jing was startled, and then she said with a smile, "I have to congratulate fellow Taoist Xiao. From now on, you can become famous in the hidden immortal continent. Any cultivator who wants to be famous will break their heads to find trouble with you." "Oh, is fellow Taoist on the profound roll or the yellow roll?" Xiaohua rolled his eyes at Fairy Jing and said with hidden bitterness, "Fairy Jing, do you think I've lived long enough? With my cultivation, how can I be on the profound roll?" "What's your rank on the yellow roll?" Fairy Jing didn't find it strange and asked with a smile, "Not high, not high. I just got on the profound roll." Xiaohua shook his head and said, "Just got on the profound roll." Fairy Jing shook her head even more. "Those Confucian cultivators are blind. With fellow Taoists' cultivation, I'm afraid you can get into the top 100. Yes, this was before I participated in the Jade Pavilion gathering." Xiaohua sneered and said, "I never thought I could be on the profound yellow roll." I'm afraid it's the doing of the Copper Pillar Country's king. Although Taoist Yuan Qing didn't say it, and he didn't have a specific name in his memory, I'm sure that the person behind this is definitely related to the Copper Pillar Country in countless ways. Speaking until here, Xiao Hua was slightly startled, as if he thought of something. He didn't have many enemies on the hidden, immortal continent. The Copper Pillar Country was one, and the other was the Duanmu family. Of course, the Duanmu family was a colossus, and Xiao Hua only offended one or two disciples. However, Xiao Hua couldn't rule out the possibility that Duanmu Qing and Duanmu Qiu weren't involved. Moreover, Xiao Hua didn't know about the profound yellow roll before. He just found out from Taoist Yuan Qing's memory that it was a hidden Confucian power on the hidden immortal continent, the profound yellow roll. It was a bounty list set up by the Taoist disciples who had grudges with Confucian cultivators. The profound roll was ranked 180, and the yellow roll was ranked 360. The difference between the profound roll and the yellow roll was in strength. The yellow roll was generally below the 5th grade, while the profound roll was for old monsters above the 5th grade. As for the profound roll and yellow roll's ranking, it was based on the bounty and had nothing to do with one's cultivation. Of course, it was only average. Those with higher cultivation would naturally have higher bounties. Taoist Yuan Qing's memory didn't have the details of the profound yellow roll, and Xiao Hua only knew that he just got on the yellow roll. However, Xiao Hua couldn't ask Fairy Jing anything. After sneering, he said, "When I return to the Black Wind Ridge and destroy the Copper Pillar Nation, my ranking will probably rise." Hee. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and laughed. If fellow Taoist Xiao destroys the Copper Pillar Nation, wouldn't the bounty be gone? Then how can fellow Taoist still be on the roll? Hee, that's true. Xiao Hua came to a realization. Looks like the Copper Pillar Nation is definitely going to be destroyed. Fairy Jing was a little puzzled and asked curiously, since fellow Taoist Xiao has such a deep grudge with the Copper Pillar Nation, why don't you just return to the Black Wind Ridge? With fellow Taoist's current cultivation, not to mention relying on Xiong Yi and the others, you should be able to restore the country by yourself, right? It's very simple. Xiao Hua had previously concealed something from Fairy Jing, but now he thought for a moment and said, "I'm not helping Jiang Country alone. There's another person inside, and that's Xiao Jin. He is also the former king of the single Yang Country that Xiao Jun and Jiji spoke of." As he spoke, Xiao Hua briefly recounted the whole story of the matter, and then he sighed and said, "This Xiao has always felt that Xiao Jun was an ungrateful and shameless person. But all the way until now, this Xiao feels that. I seem to have been deceived by Xiao Jin. The heartless one should be Xiao Jin, and the loyal one should be Xiao Jun. For the truth of the matter, I have no choice but to go to the single Yang Country and see for myself. Furthermore, the princess of Jiang Country is a pitiful person, and she is also Yuanya. The only thing in my heart, I can't help but be cautious. I can't let Xiao Jin ruin the establishment of Jiang Country." Still, there's such a strange thing. Xiao Hua's story was not short, and Fairy Jing listened with relish. At this moment, she was rather envious. I really didn't think that there would be such a romantic encounter in this world. Furthermore, fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed a man of his word. For the sake of the previous promise, for the sake of the Imperial Master's fortune, he actually participated in the Jade Pavilion meeting with such a profound cultivation. I truly admire him. Speaking up to here, Fairy Jing comforted Xiao Hua. Actually, fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't need to blame yourself. Although your cultivation far surpasses ours, you don't have the experience of establishing a country. It's normal for you to be deceived. Since fellow Taoist has the heart to investigate, you definitely know who Xiao Jin is. Of course, I feel that Xiao Jin was like this in the past, but after such a huge change, there might be some changes. Fellow Taoist doesn't need to be too worried. Sigh, that might not be the case. Thinking of Xiao Jin's gamble that night, Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change one's nature. I only hope that I don't do anything wrong. What can a small first-grade cultivator do? Fairy Jing said coldly. He can't even be a pinky in front of Xiong Yi. Fellow Taoist Xiao can rest assured. This is also one of the reasons why I accepted Xiong Yi as my disciple, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Sigh. At this moment, Fairy Jing suddenly felt a bit melancholy. I actually want to see Yuanya and Diawu. I want to know what happened to them in the end. What's so hard about wanting to see them? Xiaohua didn't understand. When Fairy Jing follows me to the single Yang Kingdom, we can return together. However, it won't be easy to see what happened in the end. Diawu seems to have some secrets and didn't admit to what happened when she was young. Who knows what happened in the end? It's actually very simple. Fairy Jing smiled faintly, just like Yuanya. As long as he finds Diawu, he can stay by her side. But how would he know? His Diawu isn't called Diawu. His Diawu is a princess. His Diawu carries a heavy burden on her shoulders. We can't let him do as he wishes. Fairy Jing is right. However, isn't this too different from Fairy Jing going to the Black Wind Ridge? Xiaohua said with a bitter smile. Oh, fellow Taoist Xiao, I will follow you to the single Yang Kingdom. After that, I would like to ask fellow Taoist to accompany me to a place. I wonder if it's convenient for fellow Taoist? Fairy Jing didn't answer Xiaohua's question. Instead, she changed the topic. Xiaohua nodded without hesitation. Of course. Moreover, I have an agreement with the single Yang Kingdom Shui Ping to go to a secret place with him. If Fairy Jing is willing, we can go together. Perhaps there will be some opportunities. As for whether I will go or not, let's wait until we reach that place. A strange smile appeared on Fairy Jing's face, causing Xiaohua to frown. All right. Xiaohua couldn't force anything and nodded in agreement. Oh, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you know who's first on the profound ranking? Fairy Jing clearly didn't want Xiaohua to think too much and asked with a smile. Xiaohua smiled. Of course I know. Isn't it the Grand Mist ancestor who just escaped recently? Then, fellow Taoist, do you know the interesting story of the Grand Mist ancestor before he wreaked havoc in the Immortal Palace 20,000 years ago? Fairy Jing's lips curled up into a crescent moon as she asked Xiaohua with a smile. Xiaohua's eyes were like stars. He also smiled and said, what happened 20,000 years ago has already turned into dust, not to mention that it was done intentionally by Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sections. This Xiao naturally didn't know. How did Fairy Jing know? -13. Chapter 3681. Hee, I naturally heard it from a senior who has a relationship with me, and it's true. If fellow Taoist wants to hear it, I can break it down for fellow Taoist. Good. Xiaohua clapped his hands and said, this Xiao likes to listen to other people's stories the most. Fairy, quickly tell me. Bah, how improper. Fairy Jing's face was slightly red. After lightly spitting at Xiaohua, she lightly opened her red lips and spoke tirelessly. At this moment, the stars were shining. The crescent moon was like a hook. The distant mountains were faintly discernible, and the clothes were fluttering near the water. The sound of wind whistling entered his ears, the sound of pine trees rustling in his heart, and the fairy was softly telling stories of the past. In the night, Xiaohua was clearly somewhat intoxicated. In the past, Xiaohua didn't feel that the hidden immortal continent was very big, especially since each small country was only a few hundred to 1,000 li. It was much smaller than a city in the Dawn Rain continent. However, after coming to the Yaodai Mountain to participate in the Yaodai Conference, he realized that he was still wrong. Although the countries of the hidden immortal continent were small, there were many countries, and the entire continent might not be small. And under Fairy Jing's guidance, this time, he flew to the single Yang country. Even with the speed of a Pegasus, it actually took him half a month to fly. This made Xiaohua understand that the hidden immortal continent was also a huge monster, far from what he had thought before. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing the scenery in front of them change, the mountains began to gradually lower, the water began to surge, and small streams separated from the big river, turning the fertile land on the ground into pieces. Fairy Jing stood up and said, 300 li ahead should be the border of the single Yang country. Oh? Fairy Jing's divine sense can actually see 300 li ahead? Xiaohua stood up and said with a smile, seems like you also have a cultivation secret technique. You know all of my remaining secrets. Fairy Jing said with a smile, it's not a secret technique, just a kind of talent. Xiaohua rubbed his nose and smiled bitterly. This Xiao has racked his brains to find secret techniques and treasures, but I can't compare to you. You're already so powerful from the start. Fiske. Fairy Jing curled her lips even more. Don't talk about cultivation. You're someone who has a chance to be on the Xin ranking. How can an ordinary person like me compare to you? Hee. Xiao Hua smiled faintly and looked up. He saw that below him was a water village with little lakes all over. Paddy fields were either in the wilderness or on the hillside. Occasionally, there were terraced fields that Xiao Hua was familiar with. It was as if ripples were spreading all over the foothills. In the mountains and on the terraced fields, there were villagers working. Under the shade of the trees, by the river, there were laughing children. In the ravines and on the lakes, there were small boats either casting nets or drifting. It was a picture of a land of plenty. There were also melodious songs that sounded like the cries of orioles coming from the boat from time to time. While they spread across the land, there was also a sonorous voice that sounded like a lion's roar coming from the shore. It resonated with the woman's voice, adding a bit of vitality to the beautiful scenery. Not bad. Fairy Jing was in the air and couldn't help but praise. Let's not talk about the monarch of the Chanyang country. Just the simple customs of the people and their rich lives are enough to make this concubine have a whole new level of respect for Xiao Jun him. Xiao Hua smiled and said, moreover, this place is so far away from the Yaodai Mountain. As the monarch of a country, Xiao Jun is actually so far away from the capital. He's not afraid of chaos in the country. It's commendable that the monarch can do this. Do you still want to look deeper? Fairy Jing asked with a smile. There shouldn't be any need. Xiao Hua nodded slightly, but since we're here and the scenery is so beautiful, why not stop for half a day? Good. Fairy Jing was also happy. She pointed at the Pegasus and flying chariot and said with a smile, since that's the case, why don't fellow Taoist put away the Pegasus and flying chariot? We'll go in disguise. As you wish. Xiao Hua laughed loudly. This was a good show that he was good at. However, after Xiao Hua put away the flying chariot, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked into the distance. His eyes revealed a kind of surprise. Fairy Jing sensed it and hurriedly looked over. She saw a small mountain in the distance. The mountain was covered with terraced fields. The terraced fields were filled with water, shining brightly and somewhat dazzlingly. It was noon and the sun was high in the sky. However, there were many people farming in the terraced fields. There was nothing strange about the hard-working situation. However, these people were all bald. Although they were wearing monk robes, the robes weren't very clean. Some were stained with mud, and some were filthy. Many of the monks farming looked tired. Their monk robes were loose, and they were actually lying down under the shade of the trees to rest. How could they look like senior monks? It's a bit strange. Fairy Jing said with a smile. The Buddhist disciples this concubine knows all hold alms bowls in their hands and go around begging alms. Each of them has a noble and virtuous face and looks like an otherworldly expert. Why are the monks here so vulgar and want to farm by themselves? I'll go down and take a look. Xiao Hua had a smile on his face, looking very interested. When the two descended from the sky, their appearances hadn't changed, but their clothes had been changed. Xiao Hua was wearing Confucian robes and holding a folding fan in his hand, looking like an elegant young master. Fairy Jing had changed into ordinary clothes. However, since she hadn't changed her appearance, her beauty was still far beyond that of ordinary people. The two walked along the road for a while, but all the people on the road, whether they were in a carriage or walking, couldn't help but look at Fairy Jing. Many people even drooled. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled and transmitted, Fairy Jing, why don't you change your appearance a bit? If you go and look like this, why would we need to descend from the sky? Fairy Jing covered her mouth and laughed. She followed Xiao Hua into the nearby forest. When she appeared in the distance, her appearance had become ordinary. That's more like it. Xiao Hua smiled and narrowed his eyes at the terraced fields in the distance. He quickly walked over and saw an old monk sitting on the ground resting. He walked forward and cupped his hands. Umitba, Grandmaster, please. I don't dare. When the old monk heard Xiao Hua call him Grandmaster, he hurriedly got up from the ground and put his palms together. This old man is just an ordinary monk. I don't deserve to be called Grandmaster. If young master doesn't mind, You can call this poor monk Chonghong. Oh, Master Chonghong. When Xiao Hua heard the old monk's name, he knew that although the old monk wasn't young, his seniority was really low. He didn't hold back and called him master. Benefactor is too polite. Calling me old monk is enough. At this moment, the old monk seemed to realize that he should call this young master benefactor. However, when he heard Xiao Hua call him master, the old monk was very happy. His face was flushed red. Xiao Hua smiled. Master Chonghong is too stubborn. Whether it's a master or a monk, isn't Chonghong a monk? What other changes can there be? Xiao Hua's words were very Buddhist. If it was a senior monk, he would definitely secretly nod. Maybe he would have to salute again. Unfortunately, Chonghong scratched his head and said with a smile, Young benefactor, this old man has just shaved his head half a year ago. My Buddhist Dharma? To tell you the truth, this old man really doesn't understand. If you have any business, you can go to Chenghui Temple on the mountain. Oh, if young benefactor doesn't know the way, this old man can take benefactor there. No need, Xiaohua said with a smile. I was just passing by and saw that the people were simple and honest, especially an old monk like Master Chonghong, who was actually working in the fields. I was quite surprised, so I stopped to ask. This old man has been working in the fields all my life. If I don't work, what do I eat? Chonghong scratched his head and smiled. This old man doesn't know what's so strange about this. Come. Xiaohua pulled Chonghong and said with a smile, let's sit down and talk. I'm afraid you're tired, so there's no need to stand. Saying this, Xiaohua looked at the stone next to him and sat down. Where was the bearing of a nascent soul master? You're a good young master. Chonghong saw that Xiaohua's sitting posture was very familiar. He smiled and said to Fairy Jing behind Xiaohua, Young miss is very lucky. This young master who doesn't put on airs must be a good person at home. He won't make young miss angry. Fairy Jing was much older than Chonghong. Hearing the old monk's words, her face flushed red. Her eyes couldn't help but fiercely glare at Xiaohua. She looked around and frowned. How could the ground next to the paddy field be clean? Fairy Jing couldn't sit down casually. Hee, young master is also a lucky person. After Chonghong praised Fairy Jing, he didn't forget to praise Xiaohua. Young miss is from a big family. You have good upbringing. Although you haven't been to the countryside, you're willing to stay by the side for young master. In the future, young master's family will definitely be very harmonious. Haha, Xiaohua laughed. He knew that the old monk was talking about the table. He cupped his hands and said, Old master, sit down. Let's chat casually. All right. The old monk Chonghong sat down and reached for something at his waist. Unfortunately, it was empty. He smacked his lips and said, Sigh, everything is good about being a monk. There's food and drink, and there's work to do. It's a pity that there are more rules. This old man has smoked tobacco for God knows how many years, and now I have to quit. Xiaohua said with a smile, Since you can't quit, then don't. Why make things difficult for yourself? That won't do. Old monk Chonghong hurriedly waved his hand. Since this old man entered Buddhism, I have to abide by the commandments of Buddhism. This old man can't lose face for my Buddhism. Then the old monk looked at Xiaohua with vigilance. Young master, are you testing this old man? Hee, monks should call themselves poor monks. Young master should also be called benefactor. Xiaohua replied with a smile. That's different. The old monk proudly waved his hand and said, That won't do. Just like a senior monk. -13. Chapter 3682. The old monk proudly said, This old man's master said that the title is a mark. No matter what the title is, it's fine as long as others know it. Even if it's Buddha, this old man should praise Amitabha. It's normal for this old man to call him Buddha. At the very least, this old man doesn't open his mouth. It's not wrong for this old man to say it in his heart. But the precepts of Buddhism are that this old monk is fundamentally different from the old farmer. Only by abiding by these rules can this old man be a monk. Otherwise, this old man isn't a monk. Namo Maitreya Buddha. Xiaohua couldn't help but recite the name of Buddha. He nodded and said, Old master is right. This young man is a bit stubborn. Oh? The old monk naturally couldn't hear the difference, but Fairy Jing was a bit stunned. She looked at Xiao Hua strangely. She had never heard the name of Namomethreya Buddha before. Young master, what do you want to ask? The old monk regretfully raised his finger and sniffed deeply a few times. He lifted his hand and pulled out a few blades of grass from the ground. While speaking, he put the roots in front of his yellowed teeth and chewed. Strands of grass-green juice seeped out from the roots, emitting a wave of fragrance. Xiao Hua looked at the old monk's somewhat familiar actions and said with a smile, "This young man has been to many places and seen many monks. Those monks are different from old master. They wear clean monk robes and kasayas. They hold wooden fish and prayer beads. The most important thing is that they hold bags. They don't farm. They beg alms every day and ask people to give them alms. So when I saw old master, this young man felt very strange. Could it be that the monks of Danliang are different from other places?" The old monk scratched his head and said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you've stumped this old man." In the past, this old man had never seen any monks. Later, Chenghui Temple appeared in Centipede Ridge, and then there were monks in Chenghui Temple. Since the day this old man saw monks, monks have to farm. This old man has never seen a monk who doesn't work. This old man can't answer you. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said with a smile, "Master Chonghong, it's fine if you don't know. In a while, this young man will pay a visit to Chenghui Temple's abbot and ask. Then can master tell this young man why you didn't live a good life and insist on becoming a monk? Why are we having such peaceful days?" The old monk Chonghong blinked his eyes, looked at Xiao Hua and said, "Little Gongzi, which eyes of yours saw that this old man was living a good life before? What's wrong with me becoming a monk?" Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "It's still my fault. I've always felt that monks who leave home in the temple are all lonely lamps and shadows. It's very boring. Chanting sutras every day is tiring, and there are so many rules and precepts. How can it compare to being outside the temple? Haha, that's what the young master and young lady think." The old monk Chonghong said with a smile, "Young master has a wife to warm his bed. Naturally, he doesn't need to become a monk. But I'm different." Fairy Jing couldn't help but blush and lower her head. She really didn't understand why Xiao Hua was so interested in such a vulgar old farmer. Chonghong then explained the reason why he wanted to become a monk. The old monk's experience could be considered complicated. When he was young, he was considered a good laborer in the village. However, his family was poor and he couldn't find a wife. Later on, a woman from another country who fled to the Chaoyang country passed by and stayed in his home. However, later on, there was war at the border of the Chaoyang country. This area became the territory of another country. The people in the village were either killed or fled. The old monk's family was separated during the flight. When the old monk returned, everything had changed. In order to wait for his lost family, the old monk stayed in the village. His family didn't come, but time came. Although the old monk could farm and make a living, it wasn't easy to live alone. If he married again, he would be too old and wouldn't be easy to find. Helpless, the old monk found the Chenghui Temple in Centipede Ridge and donated his paddy field to the temple. He even shaved his head and became a monk. Every day, he ate and drank in the temple and farmed the temple's fields. His daily life was taken care of by the young monks of the temple. It was much better than before. Hearing Chonghong's words, Xiao Hua frowned. It wasn't right to say that the Chenghui Temple took over the villagers' fields and turned it into their private property. After all, Chonghong volunteered. Moreover, Chonghong said very clearly that there were many other old monks who were in a similar situation. These old monks all volunteered to donate their fields to the temple. Chonghong and the other old monks were not able to grow all of these crops by themselves, but there were strong and healthy young monks in the temple. Usually, these old monks could not eat meat or fish, but they did not lack any other vegetables. They even had some silver and copper coins distributed to them. Not only that, there were monks in the Chenghui Temple urging Chonghong and the other old monks to chant sutras every day. Even if these old monks couldn't read, the monks would recite the sutras line by line and let these old monks chant along. The monks' usual homework was also necessary. Of course, the time for this homework might be much less than in ordinary temples. When Xiaohua heard the old monk Chong Hong talk about Qinghui Temple, not only were there old monks like them, there were also some orphans who had been acolytes since they were young. Normally, the poor people around Centipede Ridge and those who had difficulties would come to Qinghui Temple to find a monk to solve their problems. Xiaohua couldn't help but turn to look at Fairy Jing and whisper, "The old are taken care of, the young are taught, the poor have support, the widows, lonely, and disabled are all taken care of." Although Fairy Jing wasn't a Confucian cultivator, she was in charge of a country and had heard of this. She nodded slightly. "You're right. The state teacher of the single Yang country isn't simple." Yes, after hearing Master Chong Hong's words, I have an urge to meet this Buddhist state teacher, Xiaohua said with a smile. He then asked old monk Chong Hong, "Old master, do you know Xiao Jian?" Xiao Jian? The old monk was stunned and shook his head slightly. "Which village is he from?" "Haha, Xiao Jian isn't a young man. He's the previous king of your single Yang country." Xiaohua smiled and explained, "Do you know this person?" "So the person who gave birth to a son without a dick is called Xiao Jian." Chong Hong gnashed his teeth and shouted, "Of course I know this person. If this person didn't lose a cockfight, how could my village be seized by the neighboring country? If the neighboring country's soldiers didn't come, how could my home be gone? So this damn son of a bitch is called Xiao Jian. He's really despicable. Damn it, I can't wait to eat his flesh and drink his blood." "Namo Maitreya Buddha," Xiaohua hurriedly said, "Master, you've broken too many rules today. Be careful not to anger Buddha." "Humph, even if Buddha is angry, I'll still scold him." When the old monk Chong Hong heard this, he was furious. "My Danliang country used to be so good. When I was young, the whole village and the surrounding villages were very good. But because of this bastard who gave birth to a son without a dick, the villagers around Centipede Ridge were ruined. Sigh, if it wasn't for the monks of Qinghui Temple, I don't know what would happen now." "Oh." Hearing that, Xiaohua's heart moved and he suddenly asked, "Then master, do you know who the king of single Yang country is now?" "I don't care who it is." Chong Hong waved his hand angrily and said, "They beat me and I beat you. It has nothing to do with me. I just want to live my life." "Haha, then there haven't been any wars in the past 10 years, right?" Xiaohua asked again. "Of course not." Chong Hong smiled and said, "With Buddha in my single Yang country, how could there be wars?" "That makes sense." Xiaohua smiled and stood up, saying, "Master Chong Hong, do you have time to bring me to visit the abbot of Qinghui Temple?" Of course. Chong Hong hurriedly stood up and raised his right hand habitually to knock on the stone below him. Unfortunately, he knocked on empty air this time. The old monk was a little embarrassed and said with a smile, "Sigh, it's a habit of many years. It's not easy to change. But Master said it well, as long as you have Buddha in your heart, all habits can be changed." "Probably. Of course, it's also because of Buddha's blessings." Xiaohua replied with a smile. "Let's go, young master. Please follow me to Centipede Ridge. The abbot of Qinghui Temple likes knowledgeable people the most. I remember that many scholars came to the temple in the past." Although the old monk, Chong Hong, was not young, he walked as if he was flying. He walked very quickly on the mountain path, talking as he walked. Although Centipede Ridge was called a mountain, it should be called a ridge. It wasn't high, but the ridge was quite big and extended for a long time. It was like a centipede with many hillsides. In addition to the common trees on Centipede Ridge, there were also many fruit trees. These fruit trees formed a forest. Where there were no fruit trees, sometimes there were melon gardens, sometimes there were wheat fields, and occasionally there were rows of bean sprouts. There were also some monks in these places. Some were old, some were young, and some were guarded by bald novice monks. These monks, like Chong Hong, all had smiles on their faces. Perhaps they couldn't say Ba, or perhaps they didn't have clean monk robes, but when they saw Xiaohua and Fairy Jing, they all put their palms together and smiled as they saluted, making Xiaohua happy. Chong Hong, not far away, there was an enormous temple that covered the entire mountain ridge. Large and small monks' residences were covered in green cypress trees. A somewhat rough voice came from the mountain path. "Why didn't you work in the fields and come back? Are you hungry?" Xiaohua raised his head and looked over. He saw a thin and small middle-aged monk wearing a moon-white monk robe. The robe looked extremely shabby, but the shabbiness of the monk's robe paled in comparison to the monk's distressed expression. "Master." Chonghong saw this person and immediately stopped. He put his palms together and said respectfully, "Disciple was just working in the fields and happened to meet these two benefactors looking for Chenghui Temple. Disciple was afraid that they would find the wrong place, so I brought them here." -13.